Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
My name is Finn Finley. I stand at 6 feet 1 inch and weigh 195 pounds, with blonde hair that's gradually turning gray and pale blue to steel gray eyes that shift with my mood. Something Chloe used to call my mood rings. At 45, I reflect on the past when I discovered Chloe's infidelity. At 41, I was a highly successful stock trader and a fiction author, specializing in post-Civil War westerns. With a high 7-figure annual income, I thought I had it all, until my world crumbled. My wife Chloe, 39, was also successful, a real estate broker. We've been married for 15 years and had 2 kids, Lily, 12, and Daniel, 10. We lived in a luxurious, gated community on Reed's Lake in East Grand Rapids, Michigan, an upscale suburb. I'm still a successful stock trader with an uncanny knack for identifying stocks with short-term gains, predicting market moves about 35% of the time. I started with penny stocks and found it thrilling to buy shares for under $5 and watch them skyrocket. For example, I once invested $1,200 in a small pharmaceutical company, which was later bought out for $52 a share. The stock split, and I ended up making $77,000. While not every stock was a home run, many brought in profits of $5,000 or more. In addition, my fiction writing became lucrative, with movie rights sold for 3 of my novels, guaranteeing me substantial sums even if the films weren't produced. After high school, I enlisted in the Army, but after 15 months, I was medically discharged following a training accident. A Humvee struck our training group, resulting in the loss of my left leg below the knee. Though I survived, 3 others died, and 2 were paralyzed. The long rehab process left me with a deep sensitivity toward being called or seen as a cripple. After I finished my rehab, I took my disability pension and my GI Bill benefits and enrolled in college. I didn't have a clear goal, but I wanted to learn. I discovered that I loved the intricacies of the stock market and of writing. My degree major turned out to be finance with a minor in creative writing. I did not wish to stay in the dorms, so I bought a nice 3-bedroom house just off campus. It was priced right, as it was in a changing neighborhood that was undergoing gentrification. I figured to live in it until I graduated and then sell it. I figured that even if I only got 90% back, it would be cheaper than the dorm costs or renting a house or apartment. When I sold it, I broke even, and a nice young couple with a new baby had a good, inexpensive home. I met Chloe Nation Darwin, named that by her mother, who was a member of the Women's Christian Temperance Union, an anti-alcohol consumption women's group co-founded by Chloe Nation. When we were seniors in college, I was taking an elective in real estate sales, and she was in the class to finish her major requirements for a degree in real estate management. She sat next to me on the first day of the class, and after we introduced ourselves and talked some, we decided to create a study group to work together in the class. We posted a notice on the study group wanted board, and when we finally pulled it down, we had a group that besides the 2 of us included 3 men and 2 women. We met 2 nights a week at my house. The women were serious and 2 of the men were too. One man, Luke Bennett, was of the opinion that the rest of us should do the work and give him the notes. He also decided that all 3 of the ladies, and they were ladies, were conquest material. He lasted about 2 weeks before he got slapped by Chloe for putting his hand on her lower body when she was sitting next to him. I ordered him out of my house and told him he was not welcome here again. He did not take it well and threatened to beat the cripple with his fake leg. About a week before midterms, the group and I were walking out of class when someone called my name. I turned and was hit in the face by something heavy. I was down and out for the count. I woke up in a hospital room. Chloe was in the chair in my room. She looked like she hadn't slept or changed clothes since the class. She had my prosthetic in her hand, and I could see it was damaged. It seems that Luke decided after he knocked me out that my fake leg was a good weapon and tried to take it and beat me with it. Chloe told me that she and a professor grabbed him and forced him to drop the leg. Emily, one of our study partners, picked it up and wailed on Luke with it. It turned out I had a broken cheekbone and additionally, 2 broken ribs from Luke kicking me before he could be restrained. Luke ended up with a concussion, was expelled from the college, and arrested for his assault on me. His parents were very rich and tried to make it all go away by hiring a legal team that rivaled O.J. Simpson's. Then the family tried to throw money at all of the witnesses. Then they tried to buy me. No one took the money. Luke was not well liked. Luke came up for the trial and pled guilty to felony assault, as he thought he had a plea deal in place. However, in our state, we have a victim statement phase of the sentencing portion of any violent crime trial. I made my statement while still in a clear facial mask to protect my reconstructed cheek. Think of the pro basketball players and their protective masks for broken noses. And I detailed what had made Luke seek to hurt me and asked for at least some jail time. I told them how he had taken my prosthetic and was going to use it as a weapon while I was on the ground. Then I played the school security camera footage that showed Luke striking me with what appeared to be an axe handle. He got 24 months in jail. I filed suit against his trust fund, and they threw a wheelbarrow full of $100 bills at me. I got several $1,000,000 and all legal and medical expenses. Just to rub it in, I made sure that the fund replaced my damaged fake leg with a new state-of-the-art one. The new one even had distinct toes. As I was healing, Chloe was right beside me through all of the pain. With the study group keeping me up to date on my classes, I graduated on time. After graduation, I bought an apartment building in the downtown business district. After I bought it, several tenants expressed a desire to have the building go condominium. I filed the papers, and when the smoke cleared, I made another bundle and had the penthouse condo for myself. Carrie got her real estate sales license, and I got a job in a brokerage house. We dated for 6 months, and I asked her to marry me. She said yes. We decided to have the wedding planned for the next spring, and we did the meet and greets of parents and siblings. My family was impressed with Chloe. Her parents were a problem. At least one of them was a problem. Her father shook my hand with a smile on his face. Her mother was a pinched-faced, angry woman who said that she had big plans for her daughter. She told both of us that those plans did not include being married to a cripple. Chloe did not make any protest about her calling me a cripple. I left and did not wait for her. The following weekend, Chloe came to my condo and asked me if we were still engaged. I hotly responded, "I don't know. Can you stand to be married to a cripple that you chose not to defend when your mother insulted him?" She teared up, and not saying anything, handed me the engagement ring and left. The next Monday, she was sitting in the reception area of my office when I came in. I looked at her, and because I was still hurt and angry, told the receptionist, "I am not taking any visitors or appointments today." I went into my office and closed the door. Chloe called me. I told her I thought she had made herself clear at the condo, and so we had nothing to talk about. Then I hung up the phone. When I got to my condo that evening, I could smell something cooking before I got in the door. Chloe was in the kitchen, and she was slamming pots and pans around as if she had a really good mad on. I went into my bedroom and changed clothes, took off my company leg, and put on the repaired plain one. I went back out and Chloe was sitting at the kitchen table crying. The stuff on the stove was burning, and the smoke alarm chose that moment to go off. I turned off the burners, turned on the exhaust fan, and pulled the battery out of the smoke detector. I turned as Chloe put the condo key on the kitchen table, got up, and headed for the door. I intercepted her and sat her back down at the kitchen table. "You are not going anyplace until you get yourself calmed down. I am sorry for the way I was mean to you this morning at the office and when you called me, but you never tried to defend me when your mother spouted her anger and venom. I was hurt. I was also very angry, and if your mother had been a man, I would have punched her." She sat there for a good 5 minutes still sobbing. Finally, she said, "Finn." I was shocked and didn't say anything because I couldn't believe my mother would say that. I knew she had a rich second cousin she wanted me to marry, and I had told her I detested the slime bucket. "After you left, my dad came over and slapped my mother and called her a harridan, and he packed up and left. I went back to my apartment, and I cried for a couple of days and made myself sick. It took 2 more days before I could go to work. I came to talk to you this past weekend and in my mind assumed that you had decided you did not want me anymore. Then this morning I was going to ask if we could start over. When you went into your office and closed the door, I was not surprised, and then you showed me how I hurt you when you hung up on me. I knew I was going to have to work very hard to try to win you back. You know I don't think of you as a cripple, don't you?" I responded, "I know you never said anything about my leg, but when you didn't say anything when your mother called me a cripple, I jumped to the conclusion that if you didn't agree, at least you were embarrassed to have it pointed out so you couldn't ignore it. I will not be the cause of your embarrassment over my injury, and if it embarrasses you, we should end everything right now." I continued, "I was hurt. Then you showed up almost a week later without a word in between and gave me the ring back without me asking for it. I knew we were done then and I was hurt again. That started the tears again. I finally picked her up and took her into the bedroom, covered her up, and went and laid down on the couch. The next morning, Chloe woke me up and told me to call the office and take a day off. I called work and was told to solve the problem and hurry back. I was also told to do as much as I could from home through the office intranet connection using my sign-on and password. Chloe left to get some clothes for the day, saying she would bring back breakfast. About an hour later, she returned with 2 covered plates from the local diner that we both liked. She handed me a plate that had the biggest Denver omelet I had ever seen. She must have had the restaurant make it up special. Hers was the same on a much smaller scale. After breakfast, we talked for almost 2 hours. Chloe apologized again for not standing up for me against her mother. I waved it off, and we decided that we did not need to start over, but to restart. I gave her the ring back. We still had some problems, Sophia. Chloe's mother kept trying to throw roadblocks into our plans. She told Chloe to insist on a prenup. I agreed. Then she insisted on an abuse or adultery clause to the prenup. I agreed. She finally told Chloe to have the prenup say all premarital assets would remain the property of the originating person and that all assets earned in the marriage would be split 50-50 if divorced, except if the adultery or abuse clause is the reason. In that case, all marriage assets would go to the injured party. We signed. Then she wanted an accounting of my assets. I said sure, as soon as I get an accounting of Chloe's assets. That shot that down. I had told Chloe, before her mom made the demand, that I was rich, but not how much I had. She had told me she had a trust fund that gave her a stipend monthly. She did not tell me how big the fund was or how much the stipend was, and I never asked. Then dear old mom tried to shove different guys at Chloe. It got so bad that Chloe stopped accepting invites if I wasn't included. We never went over there. The final attempt was Sophia told Chloe she would not be at the wedding. Chloe said, "That is your choice. My father has agreed to walk me down the aisle, and his new lady can stand in for you." Sophia said okay, she would come. Just when I thought the roadblocks were over, Chloe informed me that her mother claimed that I was seen in a motel with another woman. I asked if she believed that. She said she didn't know. I took off the engagement ring and showed her the door. I decided I did not need the drama and definitely did not need the distrust. A week later, I got a letter from Chloe. "Finn, I am so sorry for doubting you. When I pressed mom for the dates, she told one of the dates and time was when we were at dinner together. I know I messed up again, but I was being bombarded with those claims from my mother. I finally started having doubts. I love you, and I am sorry that I let my insecurity and my mother make me doubt you. If I do not hear from you, know that I know you never were a cheater or a liar. You were the best man I have ever known, even better than my own dad. Again, I am so sorry. Chloe." I read the letter and thought an appropriate response was required. I was still very angry and hurt. "Miss Darwin, in case you did not understand the significance of my removing the ring I gave you, let me spell it out plainly. I will not marry someone who doesn't trust me. I will not marry someone who believes lies from somebody she knows dislikes me. I will not marry someone who would allow her future husband to be insulted. Does that make things clear? Now that I have vented, here is what I will promise the woman I love enough to marry, or even get engaged to. Fidelity, protection, loyalty, and love. I have been exclusive with you from the first time we dated after I finished my injury regimen. I have loved you, and only you since the second date we went on. I have made plans and promises with and to you. If you think that those things are not enough, then this is our last communication. If you can't trust me, don't contact me again. I have agreed to take another position with my firm and will be moving out of the city. I have sold the condo, and as of next Friday, I will be gone. I have left instructions at the office and with my attorney that no one but my immediate family is to be given any information about my new job or its location. I still have to work this week, but please do not try to contact me if you don't trust me. Even if you do trust me, I will be taking a new position, if for no other reason to get away from your mother's meddling. You former love, Finn." I sent the letter to Chloe's office in a company envelope. I did not want anyone but her to read it. She apparently ran home to Mama, because sure thing, Monday morning the shrew was on the phone to gloat. "You chicken, I know you weren't cheating on Chloe, but you're just a stupid, poor, nothing of a cripple and she deserves more and better." Then she hung up. Chloe finally called late Thursday. It was just before quitting time, and I had already made arrangements to have Friday off. If she hadn't called then, she would not have gotten hold of me. "Finn, before you leave, can we meet to talk? Please, there are things I need to say, and things you need to know," she added. "I know I screwed up, and you had the right to break up with me. I just don't want you to leave with you hating me. I don't hate you. I am angry, but it is not hatred. I just can't forget the lack of trust and the lack of respect you showed. I see no reason to talk, especially when your mother, remember her? The mother that lied to you, called first thing Monday morning to gloat and insult me some more. How did she even get my office number? I'm sorry. I guess that I needed to talk to someone when you took the ring back. I might have left one of your cards at her house. Please don't leave me without us talking face to face. Okay, I know I shouldn't, but I will meet you at Seymour's pub at 8 o'clock tonight. I will talk to you, but I make no promise or even hint that we will get together again. Just remember, I will no longer be around after tomorrow. 8 o'clock, and if you decide not to show, everything is done. I'll be there. I love you, Finn, and I want you. I will grovel if necessary. 8 o'clock, not 8:01 or 8:02. 8 o'clock. Then I ended the call. Well, She was there on time, and the first thing she asked was, "Can I come with you to your new job and new city? I can sell real estate anywhere in the state. And if I am with you, I won't be hearing my mother spew her venom." I was shocked. I had never imagined a request like that. I told Chloe that I needed a minute to think. After a few seconds, I decided that I wanted to be with her. We moved to the new city, and Chloe found a job within a week of our move. My new company was paying for an extended stay hotel suite for us until I could find an apartment or a house. Chloe's job was in an office about a block from mine. I found a nice house in the Forest Hills suburb of Grand Rapids. I didn't really have a reason to do it as I did, but I only put the trust fund's name on the deed and tax records. We had not gotten married yet, so the prenup made it mine as long as I wanted. I broached an idea I had to Chloe. Let's both contribute a set amount into a household account every month, and anything above that would be the earner's mad money to do with as he or she pleased. I added, as of now, my salary and bonuses are almost twice what hers were, so, for now, I will contribute 66% of the household account. If kids came along, I will contribute 100% while you are not working, but taking care of the kids. She thought that was a great idea. So we set it up to start. She would put $3,000 per month and I would put $6,000 in. That amount ensured that we would be building a decent nest egg for future house maintenance. We decided to go ahead and get married in Grand Rapids. Chloe's dad, his new girlfriend, and my family were the only guests. Chloe's mom was pissed to the point of vowing to never speak to us again. I should say I never did speak to her again. It turns out Chloe did. We honeymooned in Honolulu. We spent 2 days on the beach and the rest of a 3-week trip exploring the sights and the other islands. We spent a whole day just walking the forest and the nature preserve. We explored the open to the public areas of Mauna Loa volcano. Then we toured the remains of the leper colony that we were allowed into. It was a glorious start to our life. Life was great. Chloe was moved from mundane coal traffic to the exclusive section of the real estate firm. We had Lily, and Chloe took 4 months off and arranged for a live-in nanny. We then had Kenny and moved to the house in East Grand Rapids. We survived the normal kid traumas and their pushing of the boundaries we set for them. Childhood diseases and scrapes and sprains were lived through. The school was a fight for only the first week or so. Then the kids decided that learning stuff was fun. About 6 months after our 13th anniversary, Chloe started to question any time I was out of the house. I had quit working in the brokerage and just used them for my trades. I spent my time writing. I had more than 30 novels and anthologies published and had 4 or 5 ready to go to the proofreader. The only time I was out of the house was when I was in New York to talk to my publisher or in Chicago to talk to my business manager about my contract renewals or movie rights. I was getting the mama's meddling vibe from Chloe, and I called her out on it. She admitted that she had reconciled with her mother, but had not gone to see her as she knew I would blow up if she did. I didn't say anything. I just went into the bedroom and started moving her stuff into one of the guest rooms. She saw what I was doing and decided that discretion was the wise thing, and did not say a word until I had everything moved. Then she asked why. I wondered where all of this suspicion was coming from. Has your mother told you I was cheating again like she did before we were married? Did she ever come to see her grandchildren? Did she ever realize that I could buy and sell that a-hole she wanted you to marry? You know, the one you called a crook? Well, she didn't say anything and just started sleeping in the guest room. She never again questioned me on where I was going or who I was meeting with. It was strange, though. Shortly after that, she started telling me she was told by her boss to start showing houses on Tuesday and Friday afternoon. As an exclusive listings agent, all of her showings were by appointment only. After about 6 months of this, she slipped up. She came home one day in different clothes than she left in. I started to pay more attention. I also started to make arrangements to protect myself and my kids if she was cheating. About 3 months later, things in the home had gotten more contentious. Arguments were much more frequent and nastier. The final straw came when she said angrily, "You can't even work like a normal person. Being an author and writing fantasies for the masses to devour is perfect work for a cripple. I hope." She stopped right there, as she knew she had stepped over the line. I reached out to her and turned her toward the door and pointed. "If I am not to your liking, it is 17 steps to that door. Don't let it hit you in the butt during its closing. Call me a cripple again, and you can go home to mommy." I decided to do some investigating. About 2 weeks after the cripple comment, I decided to follow her one Tuesday. She went from lunch to a Motel 6 on the South Belt line, 28th Street. There she met with her mother and the crook. I started to follow her the next Friday, and no mama, but 2.5 hours with one of the guys from our college study group. This went on for a month. Same motel, most of the time the same room, just 4 different men, including one of my cousins. A real womanizer with a 3rd wife and 5 kids. I was sitting in Denny's restaurant on a Tuesday afternoon, watching the Motel 6 across the parking lot. My wife's car was parked next to my cousin's. I had watched them both go in the same room an hour ago. This particular time was the fifth time that I knew of. It was also the fourth different man she had met alone in this particular motel in the last month. One of the men was her office manager, George Wilson. One of the other men was the second cousin of her mother, the one she called a crook, who also worked in the same real estate office. The fourth was Henry Carter, one of the guys from our college real estate study group. She had even brought him to our house once, at least. Every Tuesday and Friday, she was there at the motel when she was supposedly showing houses. This time, I would have a semblance of revenge. I called the prearranged number and said room 107 again. Kevin Finley is today's victim. I watched as two cars pulled up and a young lady got out of one of them and a photographer got out of the other. The girl knocked on the door while the photog was taking pictures through the undraped window. The girl had her phone on so I could hear. Chloe came to the door, but only showed her face while hiding behind the door. The girl was wearing a recording device. Are you Mrs. Finley? Yes, I am. How did you get this address information? Your husband, Mrs. Finley. You have been served. Is Mr. Kevin Finley in this room with you? You obviously know he is, Chloe said with a snarl. Then she turned to the inside of the room. Kevin, get your butt over here and take what this child needs to give you. He came to the door. Mr. Kevin Finley, you have been served. Then turning back to my loving, cheating wife, Mrs. Finley, a Mr. Wilson and a Mr. Claremont from your real estate office are being served as we speak. Mr. Henry Carter will be served as soon as we can locate him. Here is a restraining order for you. It requires you to not return to the Finley residence in East Grand Rapids and to maintain a minimum of 300 feet from Mr. Finley and his children. Do you understand? She whimpered out a yes, I understand. I'll bet the cripple has done something to my mother also. The girl said, I would not know about that, but your husband did ask me to point out the window where he has been watching from. With that, she turned and pointed at me, and I waved to my soon-to-be ex. Well, things went better and worse than I thought they would. Chloe hired a shark of a lawyer, and he wanted to void the prenup, saying that the engagement and marriage that it covered had been called off. The judge did not buy it. Chloe's attorney wanted court-ordered counseling. The judge agreed. I refused, and I was jailed for 30 days before the judge gave it up as a lost cause. Chloe wanted custody, but when Lily told the judge that several times Chloe had brought strange men to our house, the judge denied that motion. Then came the ultimate insult. Her lawyer wanted the decree to be changed to irreconcilable difference so that his client could share in the marital assets. I had my lawyer present all of the photos and reports about her cheating. The divorce was granted. Chloe did get to keep her personal savings. All other assets became mine only. She got unlimited visitation as long as a court or child service official was present, and she could not take them overnight or out of state. The guys, well, they got what they deserved. Kevin was divorced, and his wife took what was left of his assets. The real estate people were all fired, divorced, and could not get a job in our area, so they moved to different states. Henry Carter was never found, and I never pursued it after the divorce. Chloe's mother was ecstatic for about 90 days. Then she found out the grandkids could not come to visit her, and I would not allow her in my house. Nobody wins in a divorce, but I got everything I expected and moved on with my life. Chloe was dutiful in her visitations until she decided to marry the crook. Then they moved to the West Coast, and we have not had a card letter or phone call since. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
As sunlight streamed through the bedroom window this morning, I watched my wife getting dressed, preparing for work. She noticed me stirring and smiled warmly. Better get up soon, lazyhead, or you'll be late for work, she teased, playfully tugging at the covers. I couldn't resist pulling her down for a hug, kissing her all over her face. She laughed and gently pulled away, reminding me she had to finish getting ready. Your memory must be slipping, Deb, I replied with a grin. I'm taking the car in for the transmission work today. That's another $2,000 down the drain on that foreign ride you love. She had insisted on an expensive German car, and while it was sleek, the upkeep was draining our budget. Debbie, my wife, was truly beautiful, inside and out. Her blonde hair and graceful demeanor turned heads wherever she went, and she had a figure that most would envy. I knew plenty of guys had tried to hit on her, even right in front of me sometimes, but her loyalty was something I never doubted. She only had eyes for me, and fidelity was a clear, unspoken agreement between us. There was never a reason for me to worry, at least, so I thought. She blew me a kiss as she ran out the door to get to work on time. As she left, I just had to smile knowing she was my love and my life. You couldn't pry the smile from my face that morning. Later that morning I found I would not smile for a long time after that day. Sometime you just can't avoid a shitstorm, and it was headed right at me. I didn't start it, cause it, or even know it was coming until that very morning. This is what happened after that beautiful morning day, and why my disposition had so radically changed. It was about 9:30 a.m. when I got back to the house. The car dealership gave me a ride back home in one of their courtesy cars. I thought the only real courtesy was to not take all my money, just most of it. I now realized why I like American cars so much. Well, I was just getting ready to make some coffee and the phone rang. I missed it before I could get it, so I waited to see if they left a message. After a minute I saw the message light blink red. I pushed play, and my whole world started to collapse. Michael, this is Tanya Fielding, and I just wanted to say I am sorry for you. And if you need anything, please stop by or call, anytime. And I mean it. Love you, Michael, and stay strong. The message stopped, and I saw the light still blinking, meaning I had more messages. It was Tanya Fielding from my church. She was a very close friend of my mother, and it was a very weird message. What the hell was she talking about? I was wondering that as I hit the play all messages button by habit. The next 20 messages were from old friends, neighbors, and even my old track coach, Mr. Slater, believe it or not. His message made it all clear. He was never one to beat around the bush. Tell that bitch of a wife she is not welcome in this town. I hope the whole town tar and feather her. That would be almost too kind for the likes of her. Michael gave me a call, and let's talk soon, son. Be strong, boy, and remember you still have good friends in this town. Oh, and if you drop the worthless 304, my niece Mary is available, and she is beautiful too. I know you will like her later, Mike. Well, I was really worried now. What the hell is going on around here? Just then I heard my car pull in the driveway in a hurry and skid to a stop. I gave Deb my car for the day and took hers in for repair. I could hear her coming up the walkway very fast with her heels clicking on the brick stone path that leads to the front door. 2 seconds later, she comes in carrying a 2-foot by 4-foot poster, but would not show it to me. She was just waving it and screaming at the top of her lungs. How could you do this to me, Michael? I thought you loved me. This is the lowest thing anyone has ever done to me. Tell me why you did it. Tell me. Couldn't we just talk about this instead of the shit you just pulled on me? They were all over my work building. She was livid, and I didn't know that the hell was going on. Deb, I don't know what you're talking about, but I just got some really strange and disturbing calls on our answering machine. I answered back. Don't change the subject, damn it. Why did you do this? She asked me again. This time I saw part of the poster she was waving around. I jumped towards her faster than she realized, and I grabbed the poster from her hands and just looked at it. Time seemed to stand still. What is this, Deb? I asked her with my hands shaking. The poster had several pictures of my wife in various sexual positions with her boss. Why are you on a poster screwing your boss from work, Deborah? I only called her that once when I was really mad at her when we first got married. It was a huge fight, and I promised her I would never call her by her given name but by Deb or Debbie. She said I can only call her that because it sounded like I was yelling at her when I used her full name. I don't think the use of her full name was lost on her, and her eyes opened wide in fear. Why is our wedding picture on it with both our faces? I asked her. It spelled out Deborah's full name, address, cell number, and work numbers. The poster also gave the same info for Mr. Paul Perdue, Deborah's boss at work. At the bottom it requested to call me for support in this tough time. And there was my name, address, home phone, and cell phone. It said, tell Michael he still has friends in the community and show your support to this faithful husband who was wronged by a cheating wife. It also requested that you call the main number of Deborah's office to complain about her and Mr. Perdue's sort of behavior. I just looked at her for the first time in my life with no love in my heart. It was snapped in two as soon as I saw the picture. So how long has this been going on, Deborah? Don't I do it for you anymore, Deborah? Was I not home enough, Deborah? Was he bigger than me, Deborah? Was he better in bed than me, Deborah? What the hell is wrong with you? I love you with all my heart and soul, and you treat me like this? So how long has this been going on, Deborah? Well, how long? I shouted at her. She looked confused, but rounded up the wagon trains for the fight. Stop the pretend nonsense. Only you could get our wedding picture and know my cell number listed on that poster. Only a handful of close relatives and friends have my cell number. Try to explain away that one a-hole, she finished. I just stood there staring at the person who I thought was my wife. Who the hell this person was in front of me, I had no idea. The confused look on my face must have made her hesitate for a second. I was never much of a poker player, and I could never bluff. On my mother's grave, I did not make or put up that poster, Deb. She looked in terror as she realized I knew nothing about whatever the hell was happening. When I promised on my mom's grave, she knew I was telling her the truth. She collapsed in the chair crying and her shoulders fell. So, Deborah, how long has this been going on? You never gave me an answer. I asked right to her face. She looked up at me with tears in her eyes and started to talk. I am so sorry, Michael. It was just a small fling and it meant nothing to me. I only saw him once and that was it. It must have been the same time someone took pictures of us together. I had no idea someone took pictures. I never wanted to hurt you. I would. She tried to tell more, but the doorbell rang and I just went to the door by habit. I was going to tell any well-wishers on my part to stay out of my business until I figure out what the hell was going on in my life. I opened the door, and there was my sister Carol. I felt like crap and didn't need family around feeling sorry for me until I straightened everything out. Carol, it's a bad time right now. Can you come back tomorrow? I asked her. No. Just open the door and I will fill you in. I know more than you and you need answers, she said as she pushed her way in. She was carrying a few of the same type posters Deborah just brought in earlier. Well, if it isn't the hooker from Babylon in person, she said, looking at Deborah at the dining room table when she walked in the house. What is that supposed to mean, Carol? I thought we were friends? You can't just come in my house and call me names, bitch. Deborah answered back. I saw a spark in my sister's eye I have never seen. It scared me totally. I was even afraid of her, and she was my sister. Tell you what, bitch, let's air all your dirty laundry and see who the bitch really is, she said to Deborah, and I could see she was afraid, very afraid. First, let's go into the den where your TV setup is, Michael, because I need to play a DVD for you. She looked at me and was reading my mind. Don't worry, Michael, it is not Deborah acting like a hooker with any men, though I have all of that documented. As Carol said this, my head snapped towards my wife. She was looking down at the ground and wouldn't look me in the eye. It is actually much sadder video than that. It does concern her, though, Carol said as she pointed to Deborah. Deborah looked up for a second when her name was mentioned, but dropped her head in shame again. Deborah suddenly got up to leave and said she didn't need any of this shit. As she got up to leave the house, I stood in front of her. If I have to, I will break both your legs if you try and leave now. I need answers, and it looks like my sister has it covered. Get in the den now, was all I said. Deborah knew I was the most pissed off she has ever seen me. She even recoiled when I made my threat. Don't even go to the bathroom right now. We all walked into the den with Carol, literally pushing Deborah through the room and onto the sofa. Michael, before I start, I need to tell you something. First, let me ask you a question. Do you remember the day Mom died? Carol asked me sadly. Well, my face fell and I looked instantly sad also. The memories of my mom dying were still raw even after almost 1 year later. Combined with my new news about my cheating wife, I was crushed. I remember missing Mom by 15 minutes to say goodbye when she passed away that day. It still bothered me to this day. I just nodded. Well, Michael, Mom made me promise on her deathbed to take care of you. Well, that is not all, but you will see. I got there that day about 1:30 p.m. Mom called me and said she needed to talk to me real bad. I could tell she was upset and not feeling good just by her voice. She then said never mind and told me she would tell me tomorrow. I of course left work and went to her house instantly. I am glad I did too. She told me, well, let's just see the disc, it will explain a lot. She finished. Carol went in her purse and pulled out a DVD disc. Michael, the only reason I am showing you this now is because Mom and Deborah made a promise to each other the day she died. What promise did you make to my mom, Deborah? Well, what was it? I asked her, but she said nothing. Just push play and watch the tape. Then you will understand everything, Michael. Carol instructed me. I did it, and the screen came alive with my mom's old bedroom. She was in bed with the covers pulled up, and she looked like hell. She was white as a ghost and sweating. Her eyes were all over the room, and she looked the saddest I ever saw her. Even sadder than when Dad passed away 6 years earlier from cancer. I saw the camera move and finally settle on the big dresser across from the bed. This angle let me look at the bed with my mom and Carol talking. This is what was said. Carol, you sure it is recording? I don't know much about all that electronic stuff, but this is important. Mom, it is fine. Just relax and try to stay calm, okay? Carol said, trying to get her to calm down. Now just tell me what is bothering you and I will help. Well, I went to the new restaurant today, Danella's on 5th St. All the ladies from my card club wanted to go, so we broke the bank on our club kitty and went in first-class style. I was having a great time and needed to go to the bathroom. My medicine alert went off, and I needed to take my medication. It was a huge place, so I went walking around till I found the ladies' room. After I came out, I started to go back to my table to cut one of my heart pills, but something caught my eye. I did a double take to see if I was just seeing things, or it was real. There at another table was Debbie, Michael's Debbie, with another man. He was very tall with a mustache and an expensive suit. They were kissing, and he had his hand under her skirt. Well, she was all smiles and giggling while they played kissy face. I was just beside myself. I didn't know what to do. I knew Michael would be crushed if he found out. I lost all respect for Debbie right there and then. I walked up to the table to talk to her, but with every step I got more and more angry. By the time I reached their table, I did a terrible thing. She just let the word hang and Carol asked what she did. I slapped that bitch in the face as hard as I could. I was aiming for both their faces, but the guy ducked out of instinct when he saw my arm start to swing. Debbie wasn't so lucky. I connected and I heard her head snap back and to the side. I saw the red imprint from my hand on her cheek, and the look on her face said she never saw it coming. I never ever hit anyone in my life, that is how angry I was. I pushed pause on the DVD and looked at Deborah. So the day you came home with the black and blue cheek, you didn't run into a door like you said, but my mom actually slapped you because she caught you cheating on me at a restaurant? Well? I asked her. Yes, I am sorry, is all she could say in a small, low voice. I just shook my head, sighed, and pressed play again, and my mom's voice picked right up with the story. Well, she tried to give me a bunch of bullshit lies and crap you normally hear from a cheater who was caught. I told her to save her breath. Then I did something she wasn't expecting. Make me a promise right now. Right now. I yelled at her right in the restaurant. You will not break my son's heart, and neither will I. If you promise to be true to my son and never cheat on him again, I will forget I was ever here. I will say nothing to Michael, though I would love to. He has been a great husband to you, and this is how you treat him. I do not want to be the one to tell him, but I will if need be. So before you leave with your arm candy next to you, tell him and me what your promise is. And you better be quick about it. Debbie promised with tears in her eyes to me that she would stay faithful to Michael. I told her that she already broke her promise to Michael, and I don't take my promises lightly. If I ever found out she cheated on Michael again and broke her promise to me, she would wish she was never born. I took her at her word, but I still don't trust her. This is where you come in, Carol. I need you to. No, I want you to promise me if Debbie ever breaks her promise that she made to me, that you show her the path to hell firsthand. I am not sure what you mean, Mom. What is it you want me to do? Carol asked. First, keep an eye on her, a close eye. Protect Michael if you can, but if she cheats again, then take care of her for good. I want you to expose her for the 304 she is. I know God will punish me for calling her names, but I am still upset. I have found that cheaters like cockroaches hate the bright light. If she fails Michael and breaks her promise to me and him, I want you to expose her publicly to everyone in town. I also want you to ask Michael's friends to rally around him for support. If she backslides on our promise, he will feel alone and lost. I don't think that bitch has any idea how much Michael really loves her. I think if she really knew, she would have never strayed in the first place. Okay, Mom, I will do as you ask. Carol answered. Now if she keeps her word, this conversation never happened, and I will take it to my grave. You must promise me you will never ever tell Michael or show him the recording unless she cheats again. Promise me, Carol. I promise, Mom, she said sadly. Good. Oh, by the way, I saw your father earlier, you know. As she said this, my mom had a smile as big as Texas. A mom. Daddy died 6 years ago. You do remember? Carol asked her. Yes, Carol, I know, but I slept before you arrived, and he sat at the foot of the bed and told me to smile and said he was waiting for me. I love you, Carol, and tell Michael I love him also. She paused after this and was silent for a second. I could see tears in her eyes. Now if all stays the same, then they will live a good life together. If she fails, then I would also like you to do something for me. At this point, she motioned for Carol to come closer and whispered into her ear. Carol opened her eyes wide for a second and just shrugged her shoulders. Okay, Mom, just repeat it one more time so I remember. At this point, Carol leaned back down to hear her mother whisper in her ear once more. Mom, you should really relax. I just called Michael. He is coming right now and he wants to see you. Carol told her mother as she straightened up. Carol, I am feeling very weak, honey. I just need to get some sleep. I want to dream of your father again. It makes me feel good. She ended weakly. I love you, Carol, very much. Tell Debbie to keep her promise and tell Michael I love him. She finished quietly, almost unable to hear her last word on the TV. My mother died at that moment. Carol took the remote from my motionless hand and pressed stop. The Carol on the screen was leaning over the lifeless body of my mother, crying when the picture went dark. That was the scene when I arrived that day, and it brought back a flood of memories. I realized what the DVD meant and the promise Deborah broke to me and my mother. I rounded on her and grabbed her by the arms as she sat on the couch crying. Look at me. Look at me. I yelled to her face. She looked up between her hair and her crying eyes that said she was sorry, or sorry she got caught. I wasn't sure. You broke a promise to Mom and me. I don't think you slept with Paul Perdue only once, did you? Well, don't look away. Answer me. Did you sleep with him again? I asked loudly. Yes, is all she could say in soft voice. Carol came back in room at that point. I didn't see her leave, but she returned holding the posters she arrived with earlier. Here is what your unfaithful wife has been up to since her promise to Mom was broken. The detective reports, videos, and pictures are in the car, but I did think you wanted to see the posters I made. I took Mom's last request to heart. She said, smiling. Your loving wife was being followed since she was at Mom's funeral a year ago. She actually was true for about 5 months. I think the incident in the restaurant with Mom got her scared. But after the funeral no one said anything, and you never changed Michael, so she thought she was off the hook. She thought the promise she made to a dying woman did not have to be honored. I almost gave up the PI surveillance but got a funny note from the detective that last month. Deborah was going to lunch with the same man for a week straight. Paul Perdue. Your precious wife thought she could break her promise to Mom as easily as she broke her promise to you. First, let me inform you she has cheated with 5 men since the day Mom died. There may be more, but that is all we documented up till now. She had an extended relationship with 3 of them. When she said this, I looked at Deborah, and she just melted in front of me. The first poster is the one you were looking at that Deborah brought home. I plastered them everywhere at her work site. I asked for support for you, Michael, and embarrassment for Deborah and her sex buddies. The other 2 posters are the same, but with different people. The second poster is of Reverend Taylor. You know him, Michael. Betty, his wife, is good friends with your wife, Deborah. Imagine that. I put these all over the church and the cars of the people attending services this morning, she finished. Debbie lifted her head as soon as she heard Taylor's name and saw the poster. It had Deborah in sexual positions with the holy man himself in all his glory. Again, it had my picture on it in my wedding photo. She realized just what it meant. My wife cried out, "No," and went silent. But that is not the last one. Your lovely wife has been seeing a Mr. Edward O'Brien. And at this, she presented the poster with the same message, but had Edward O'Brien in the pictures having sex with Deborah. I put these all over his neighborhood and home. I rounded on Deborah again and shouted at her. You were even screwing Eddie the Snake O'Brien? Oh my God. That guy screws anything, and I mean some of the nastiest 304s and crack hookers in town. I probably have the clap or some nasty disease now. Holy shit. Eddie the Snake. I still don't believe it. You will never touch me again. I yelled at her as I pushed her away from me like she was infected. I was so angry I was shaking. My sister pulled me up and pushed me in the direction of the front door. I just stood in the hallway waiting for Carol to tell me or direct me into action. I was numb. She went back to Deborah and addressed her. Okay, this is what is going to happen. Stand up and look at me. Carol ordered her. Deborah slowly stood up and tried to look at me in the doorway. Her legs were very shaky on her feet. I am sorry, Michael. I really am. I do love you. She went quiet as Carol gave her a look that would kill. Now you will pack a bag when I take Michael out for some fresh air. In an hour, I want you out of here. I don't care where you go or who you stay with. Check your boy toy stable and see if any of your studs' wives will take you in. Not likely. She finished to my wife. My mom wanted me to give you a message from her before we leave. She wanted to tell you something, and I want to be sure I get this right. She hesitated and recalled what Mom wanted her to say. Okay, here goes. If you had kept your promise to me, you and Michael would have a beautiful, healthy, and happy life together. No one would know what you did today in the restaurant. But since you lied and broke your promise, everything that happens to you has been brought on by yourself. You will have bad health, sadness, and be lonely for the rest of your life. That is my wish for you. With that, Carol wound up and swung her hand around towards Deborah's cheek. I heard the smack just after the hand hit her face. The slap knocked her back down on the couch again. That one is from my mother, bitch. Don't ever talk to me again. You may not have killed my mother, but you sure as hell drove in some of the coffin nails. Carol added as she turned and grabbed my hand and led me out the front door to her car. I knew life would never be the same. I should fill you in on what went on after that day when Deborah was exposed to the world. Almost 2 years later, I was sitting on my porch in a chair when a car came up my driveway. It was Mr. Slater, my old track coach. He was all smiles. He just heard the news and was beside himself. He got out of his car already talking. I just can't believe it. We are going to be related. I told you that day I called you about my niece Mary, and I was right, wasn't I? He asked me as I just smiled, and he shook my hand over and over. Tom, you were absolutely correct. Mary has been the best thing in my life since I met her. I never realized you were talking about the teenage girl in pigtails who brought you your water bottles at practice all those years ago. She is a beautiful woman now, and I am very lucky you introduced us. Thanks for looking after me, Tom. It really meant a lot to me and Carol. I finished as he started to tear up. He punched me in the arm and started to laugh. Look at me, Michael. I am about to cry like a little girl. I better get going and remember to take care of Mary. I know you will, son. See you later, and don't forget my wedding invitation in the first row." He finished as he jumped in his muscle car and drove off. I was doing all right. My mom was correct that I would feel all alone and by myself. The funny thing is Carol reminded me that was what Mom didn't want. Mom knew me well enough to know I needed a support system. She knows I always kept things inside all to myself. Well, at first, I didn't like everyone reminding me of my situation, but then I got it. My mom knew it also. The people were not prying into my life, but they wanted to make sure that I know they cared about me and my life. They were not digging up old wounds, but giving me support no matter how clumsy it may have seemed trying to do it. These great people in my town were behind me and supporting me. That feeling alone has made all the crap I went through with Deborah look tame. I could still walk around town with my head held high. Deborah didn't fare as well. We divorced as soon as I could. She never contested anything. I got a call from her dad on the West Coast last week filling me in on how she is doing. He still asks if we will ever get back together. She made a mistake. We are all human. She needs you badly. Anything he could think of to get us back as a couple. That was not going to happen. Deborah moved there after only a week in town. She literally became the poster child for cheating in my town. People nicknamed her Poster Girl up until she left town. No one would call her by Deb or Debbie, just Deborah. My sister made sure of that. She was treated like she had leprosy in the town. No one would help her, and I did feel sorry for her, but she brought it upon herself, and it was beyond my control now. She was fired that day. She came home with the poster along with Mr. Paul Perdue. His wife divorced him and took all his money and the kids. He was broke, and everyone in town hated him because of what he did. He left after 2 weeks. Reverend Taylor disappeared that day and left his wife Betty. Nice holy man, I thought. He was reportedly in New York and started another church, but some anonymous source informed the new church members of his past. He is now out of New York, and his location is unknown. Eddie the Snake O'Brien got it the worst. His wife's brothers had enough of Eddie playing around on their sister. When the poster went up around Eddie's house and neighborhood, they beat him up real bad. I didn't feel sorry in the least. He ruined a few marriages in his day. He left town the day he got out of the hospital, and no one seemed to care where he went. The curse my mother put on Deborah seemed to be holding. She was gaining a large amount of weight. She was drinking and taking prescription drugs for depression. She has high blood pressure, diabetes, and is always depressed. She has made no friends at her new location, didn't date anyone, and seems to be going steadily downhill. Her health and her mood were bad and getting worse. Her dad said she was slowly dying, and he could do nothing about it. She had no real friends to speak of. I still love her and always will. I just wish things turned out differently and Deborah had kept her promise. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
Every morning, Linda and I have this habit of staying in bed for a few extra minutes after the alarm goes off. We've been together long enough to know what works best for us. Those warm, lazy minutes feel so good, but they come at a cost, a frantic rush to get ready for work. Back when the kids were still at home, that mad dash included getting them off to school. Now that they're grown and out of the house, we find ourselves lingering in bed even longer before facing the morning chaos, which always leads to the drive to work. To make things more stressful, I had to leave the house a good 20 minutes earlier than usual today. Linda had to work late tonight, so we decided to carpool since our offices aren't far from each other. But instead of taking my car, I opted to ride my mountain bike to work. The weather forecast promised a beautiful spring day, and it seemed like the perfect opportunity. I took the last bite of my toast, washed it down with a swig of coffee, and was ready to head out. "I'm on my way, honey," I called out toward the bathroom, where Linda was still getting ready. I waited for her to respond, maybe poke her head out the door, but I got nothing. "I'll see you tonight." "I love you," I added, though I was in a rush and didn't have time to dwell on her silence. With that, I tossed my keys in my backpack and headed out the door. Let me introduce myself. I'm John Harris, a 53-year-old office manager at the State Department of Public Works. My wife, Linda, is 49 and works as an administrative assistant in the main office of a manufacturing company. We're a good-looking couple, if I do say so myself, but Linda is stunning, especially for her age. She doesn't look anywhere near 50, and I've noticed plenty of men turning their heads when we're out together. About 10 minutes into my ride, my phone pinged with a text message. A few seconds later, it started ringing. Trying to navigate traffic on a bike while answering a call is a challenge, so I ignored it. By the time I got to work, I was in such a hurry to get dressed for an 8:45 meeting that I forgot all about the phone calls. It wasn't until my afternoon coffee break that I remembered to check my messages. I had 5 from Linda, 2 texts and 3 voicemails. The first text came in at 8:10, saying, "You grabbed the wrong keys. Call me." The second one arrived at 8:35, "I'm waiting for your call." When I finally listened to the voicemails, the first one, left at 8:11, said, "Hi, honey. You took the wrong set of keys when you left. Could you drop them off at my work this morning? I'm going to need them. Call me." Her voice had a sharp edge to it, which was odd. She didn't need those keys at work. They use a fancy security system with key cards. The second voicemail, left around 10:15, was even more irritable. "What are you doing, John? I've been waiting for the keys all morning. Call me. I have better things to do than wait for you." After 25 years together, 23 of them married, I could tell she was fuming. Her anger dripped from every word. Before I played her last message, I pulled out my keys and laid them on my desk. The final voicemail, left at 12:55, was practically a shout. "Where are you? I'm still waiting for my keys. I don't know what you were thinking this morning, but they better be on my desk this afternoon." Linda wasn't holding back. She was livid. I was taken aback. Lately, it seemed like Linda was always mad at me over nothing. I thought maybe it was something to do with her approaching 50, maybe hormonal changes or something. That's what she told me when I asked why she was acting so differently. She snapped at me when I suggested she see a doctor about it, get some hormone therapy, or whatever they do for menopause. Life with Linda had become pretty difficult lately. Our relationship was strained, but it seemed ridiculous that she'd blow up over a set of keys she didn't even need. I've been trying to work on myself, but I'm no pushover. 2 can play at this anger game, I figured. So, I decided not to call her back and just wait until 5 o'clock to bring her the damn keys. A little after 5, I reached her office, just in time to see her pulling out of the parking lot. Big surprise. Despite the traffic and my bike's capabilities, there was no way I could catch up with her. Not that it mattered, we were both heading home. I knew she'd eventually get out of the gridlock and pick up a speed I couldn't match. So, I stuck to my usual, more direct route to see if I could beat her home. But then, something strange happened. I was caught off guard when I saw her car turning toward a different part of town. It was an easier route for me. I could cut through the park, but definitely not the best way for her. She turned onto a street lined with 2-story duplexes and parked at the curb. I had a feeling something was up, so I slowed down and watched from a distance as she climbed the stairs and rang a doorbell, all while typing away on her phone. Even from where I was, I could hear her phone chime with a text. She read the message, walked back to her car, and drove off. What the hell just happened? I muttered to myself. Linda, who was supposed to be working late, had shown up at some random apartment. I gripped the keys in my hand, my mind racing. I recognized her car keys and our house keys, but what was really going on here? However, there was another key that I didn't recognize. I had a hunch that this was the key Linda was so desperate to get back. I walked up to the duplex, climbed the stairs, inserted the key into the front door lock, and turned it. The click of the lock felt like the end of my marriage to Linda. I didn't open the door, though. I needed a moment to think. What was I going to do? The rising anger in me made it tempting to barge into my wife's lover's apartment and tear the place apart. Or maybe I could wait for him and beat the crap out of him. Or I could just go to the police and end up in jail. No, acting out of blind anger wasn't the right move. But I had to do something. I glanced inside the apartment. Technically, I was trespassing, but if I moved fast, I wouldn't get caught. The first thing I saw was a neatly stacked pile of mail on a small table in the hallway. I grabbed the phone bill from the tuck. The letter was addressed to Eric Larson. I had no idea who he was, but the phone bill could be useful. I slipped it into my backpack. That was enough for now. I didn't want to get caught snooping around someone else's apartment, so I got out of there quickly. Instead of heading straight home, I drove to a nearby hardware store. Within minutes, I had a duplicate key made. I expected Linda to be home by the time I got back, but her car wasn't in the driveway. Whatever her lover had texted her, it must have been to meet somewhere else. I decided to mess with her a bit. I called, but she didn't answer. I didn't leave a text, but I did send her a voicemail. I'm running late too, but I'll bring the keys soon. I'll see you at your office. It only took a few seconds to get a reply. That won't be necessary. I've made other arrangements. Just go home, was her immediate response. In her head, she was probably thinking, and leave me alone, idiot. I had a lousy evening. Linda didn't get home until 10 o'clock, giving me a good 4 hours to stew over what had happened. First, I needed proof of her cheating. With a copy of the key now on my keychain, it would be easy to gather what I needed. The phone bill pointed directly to her lover, Eric Larson. They were constantly on the phone and texting each other, even when Linda and I were together in the evenings. All this time, I thought she was texting the kids. Did I really need to know why she had decided to leave me? No, it didn't matter anymore. Our love had faded over the past 6 months. Indifference, constant nagging, and blame can only go on for so long before a man's love fades. Now I saw it clearly. Linda had been distancing herself from our marriage for a while. Today's discovery was just the final blow to a marriage that had already gone to hell. We were done. There's no benefit to proving adultery in our state. Irreconcilable differences would be the reason, and the judge would split our assets 50-50. But as the cheated husband, I felt I had a lot to gain by reclaiming some of my pride. I wasn't going to let Linda get away with lying while married. The truth would be known to our kids, parents, and friends. And knowing how Linda had changed over the past few months, I wouldn't be surprised if she tried to paint me as the bad guy somehow. I did toy with many revenge scenarios, but I decided not to go down that path. I only had a few years before early retirement, and I didn't want to mess that up. Retirement wouldn't be what I had envisioned all those years ago with Linda, but it was better than ending up in jail and losing my job. At least I'd enjoy my retirement my way, not Linda's. When she finally got home, I decided to let her irritation work in my favor. Maybe she'd start a small argument, which could excuse my icy behavior over the next few days. But sex with Eric must have calmed her down a bit. When she walked in, she wouldn't even meet my eyes. Linda seemed surprised to find me still sitting in the living room. She tossed the spare car key into the dish by the door and grabbed her usual set, which I'd placed there earlier. After one look, she tossed them into her purse. I expected a grunt or something, but she didn't say a word. She headed straight for the bathroom. "I'm tired," she muttered to no one in particular as she walked down the hallway. "I'm going to take a shower and go to bed." "What?" I called after her. "No love tonight?" Her only response was to close the bathroom door behind her and lock it. Do you know many married people who lock the bathroom door? I hadn't noticed it before, but now that I thought about it, she did that a lot when she came home late. God, I was so stupid. No wonder she was leaving me. Before going to bed, I watched the evening show. I hoped Linda was sound asleep. But I swear, she was still awake. Sleep was escaping both of us. The next morning, under the pretense of a meeting, I left early in my car. Instead of heading to work, I went to an electronics store and bought some interesting items. It only took me a couple of hours to wire Eric Larson's apartment for sound and video. While I was there, I had time to look around. The place was nicely furnished, with many items that looked like antiques. I don't know if he had a maid, but the apartment was spotless, not a speck of dust anywhere. I wondered if he was a stickler for cleanliness. It gave me something to think about as I set up the equipment. I had hoped my little surveillance setup would stay under the radar for a few days, at least long enough to capture some scandalous photos of my wife and her lover. It turns out I didn't need to worry about that at all. Back at the office after lunch, another text from Linda popped up, telling me not to wait up because she had another late meeting. I went ahead and scheduled an appointment with the lawyer for the next day. That evening, I drove past Larson's apartment and spotted Linda's car. Despite everything that had transpired over the past 24 hours, the sight of her car still made my heart sink, a fresh stab of her betrayal. Tomorrow was going to be crucial. I drove back home, tempted to check into the town motel. But it seemed absurd to waste money on a place I didn't want to be when none of this was my fault. Once back, I thought about sleeping in the guest bedroom but decided against it. After all, I wasn't the one who had wrecked our marriage. Let Linda take that room. I dumped all of her belongings into the guest room haphazardly, whole drawers piled on the bed and clothes yanked out of her side of the closet and thrown in there. It was a surprisingly therapeutic task. With each armful I carried to the guest room, I felt a bit better. When Linda came home that evening, she looked even worse than she had the night before. She had that disheveled look that suggested she had just come from a marathon session with someone else. Again, she was caught off guard by my presence. She didn't offer any explanations for her tardiness or appearance, as if there was anything she could say that would make it better. I couldn't believe I was the source of such pain. With the impending divorce hanging over us, I grabbed her hand and pulled her towards the bedrooms. "What are you doing, John?" "You're hurting me," she whimpered. I forced myself to sound more confident than I felt. I knew I was on the brink of losing her completely. I needed to act quickly and keep my composure. "Shut up, bitch," I said loudly, surprising even myself with the harshness of my words. It was so unlike me to speak like that, as if I were hitting her with my words. Suddenly, the accusatory glares I'd been receiving for months turned into fear. But was it fear of violence or fear of exposure? I had no idea, and I wasn't about to ask. I opened the guest bedroom door so she could see her belongings stacked in disarray. "Starting tonight, this is your room," I said sharply, shoving her inside. "We're no longer husband and wife." "Stay away from me," I added. "In fact, it'd be better if you packed up and left right now." Linda was furious and tried to resist, insisting, "Oh no, you bastard. If anyone's sleeping in the guest room, it's you." She ranted about all she had done for the kids, for me, and the house, demanding respect or for me to leave. Did I want to argue with her? No. I shoved her back into the guest room with a surprising force. "I'm giving you two choices," I growled. "Either you stay here until the divorce is final, or you move in with Eric Larson right now." Her reaction to Larson's name was immediate. Despite her recent behavior, she knew me well enough to realize I was aware of her affair and had no intention of forgiving her. She knew we would never part as friends. Who could be friends with someone who stabbed you in the back? I could see the defeat in her eyes. She stumbled into the room, threw her clothes aside, and sat on the bed, tears streaming down her face. She muttered something I couldn't catch. "What?" I shouted. "I'm sorry," she said louder. "I was so stupid." "Please don't hate me, you know me, Linda," I replied. "I won't hate you forever, but I'm sure I won't love you either. Hell, I don't even know if I can be around you." I began to close the door but decided to add one final blow. "I'd prefer if you left as soon as possible," I said firmly. "Just sign the divorce papers when they arrive, and we'll never have to see each other again." I shut the door, leaving her behind with her sobs as the last sound I heard. The next day, I retrieved my spy gear from Larson's place and then headed to my attorney. Since my demands were straightforward, he assured me the divorce papers would be ready within 2 days. I paid him up front and left. I tried to return to work, but it proved futile. I finally explained my situation to my supervisor, who advised me to take a few days off. When I drove home, I saw Linda moving her things out and parked further down the street. From the video I had, I recognized Erik Larson helping her. I wanted to beat him up, but with his extra 3 inches and 40 pounds, that wasn't a practical option. I drove away. That night, the real impact of Linda's betrayal hit me. My anger faded, replaced by an overwhelming loneliness I had never felt before. The divorce would have been even more devastating if our children were still living with us. While the absence of them was a blessing, it was also a curse, leaving me with no one to lean on. My parents were gone, and my brother and sister lived far away. I decided to reach out to my 2 daughters, only to find out that Linda hadn't even contacted them yet. She had always been in touch with them while they were in college, so I guess it was easier for her to lie to me than to them. A few weeks ago, if someone had asked me how to handle a cheating spouse, I would have said to stay discreet, keep the peace, and honor the 23 years of commitment as a wife and mother. But now, suffering and desperate for either love or sympathy, I had to confide in my 2 daughters, Emily and Sarah. I was relieved when neither of them questioned me when I revealed that their mother had betrayed me and left me for another man. For a moment, I worried they might have known all along, but seeing their shock and distress reassured me. My barely contained sobs seemed to confirm my story. Their support was a comfort, but it was also a mistake. By the time I reached out to the kids, I had already finished a whole bottle of wine. I'm not much of a drinker. Linda and I would share a bottle or 2 of wine a week, or maybe have a few beers. The problem wasn't the drinking itself, but the self-pity fueled by alcohol. When faced with failure, a man must own up to it. Yet, despite my efforts, I couldn't understand what drove Linda away. My job never interfered with my family life. I only traveled for retraining once every 5 years, and my overtime was minimal and predictable. To be honest, I might have let myself go a bit since turning 50, but I wasn't overweight or out of shape. Larson didn't appear much younger or fitter than I was. I wondered if he was a better lover, which was an area where I had limited experience. Before meeting Linda, I had only 4 girlfriends between the ages of 18 and 28, and Linda and I had a lot to learn together. I didn't think Linda left me for social status either. His apartment wasn't extravagant, and while his furniture was nice, he wasn't a father. We were likely in the same income bracket. As I curled up in the fetal position that night, it struck me that there was no real reason for her departure, other than the fact that I was simply who I was. Can you really struggle with being yourself? Could I stop existing just so everything could be all right? The next morning, around 10 o'clock, I got a call. Without checking the caller ID, I answered the phone. "You son of a bitch," Linda yelled. "You shouldn't have been so rude to Emily and Sarah." For a moment, I considered hanging up, but I also wanted to confront her to end this nightmare. "What's rude, sweetie?" I asked. "Is it the months of cheating, moving in with your lover, or is it all of the above?" There was only silence, which I despised. "Linda, I still have some feelings for you," I said. "I'm not sure if it's my male or female side, maybe just my foolish side, but there's one thing I won't do: lie to our family." "You wouldn't dare," she pleaded. "Not Daddy, please." "Watch me," I said, and hung up. My finger hovered over the speed dial for Linda's father, but I didn't press it. Walter had been struggling since his wife passed away from breast cancer 2 years ago. He was a good man, but in his 80s, his health was fragile, and his will to live seemed a bit weak. I could certainly relate to that feeling today. And he was a good man. I figured it was better to let him live in peace rather than let his daughter's actions ruin his life. My anger began to fade, so I decided to inform Linda of my choice. I picked up Larson's cell phone bill and dialed the number listed. A man's voice answered. I hesitated for a moment. Linda Harris, please, I asked. There was a pause, and I could hear someone crying in the background, presumably Linda. Who's asking? Larson's voice came through. Her father, you piece of shit, I lied, barely containing my fury. And don't expect to talk to her. Just tell my daughter to forget me. Leave my grandchildren, my son-in-law, and me alone. Goodbye, asshole. Less than a minute later, feeling a bit guilty, I called Linda's cell phone. She answered quickly but was still sobbing. Hello, Linda, I said, breaking the silence. Did you have a good day? John, why? She asked. Why did you tell my father? It could destroy him. He's been in such poor health lately. You knew that. Hey, don't shift the blame, I said, struggling with the harsh words. It wasn't your father on the phone with your lover, it was me. I care about your father, and your cheating would have killed him. I want to make this clear. Are you listening? Yes, she replied. I'm listening. Don't ever let this guy come between me and my daughters, or your father will know everything about you. All the ugly details, I warned her. Don't think I'm joking. I trusted you for most of my adult life. I didn't think it was possible, but you shattered that trust. I'm fighting not to just end you on sight. I have so much hatred for you right now, and it defines me at this moment. Do you understand? Yes, she said through her tears. Mark, I'm so sorry. I never wanted this. Neither did I said, and hung up. 6 months later, I received the official divorce papers, marking the end of my marriage. I had gotten over my bout of depression, but something still felt missing in my life. I couldn't quite figure out what it was. I tried dating a few women, but things never went far. It seemed like they could sense the emotional baggage I carried. I even had a one-night stand with a work acquaintance who was also divorced. But even that felt hollow, just two people seeking a quick fix for their loneliness. It left me feeling even more isolated than before. One evening, after coming home from work, a revelation struck me. Since moving into my new apartment and selling the old house to split the proceeds, I had started to name the dust bunnies collecting around the place. Hi, Jack, I greeted, peeking out the door. I was reverting to my bachelor days, naming the dust clumps I found everywhere, mostly behind doors and under the bed. Jack was stationed by the front door, while Roger and Bugs had made a home under the bed. I almost grabbed the vacuum cleaner from the closet, feeling embarrassed at the thought that Larson would never let his place get so messy. As I curled up in the fetal position that night, I had another moment of realization. There was no clear reason for Linda's departure, it was simply because I was who I was. Can one truly struggle with their own identity? Could I just stop existing so everything could be okay? The next morning, around 10 o'clock, I answered the phone without checking the caller ID. You son of a bitch, Linda yelled. You shouldn't have been so rude to Emily and Sarah. For a moment, I considered hanging up, but part of me wanted to face the confrontation to end this nightmare. What's rude, sweetie? I asked. Is it the months of cheating, moving in with your lover, or is it all of the above? There was only silence, which I loathed. Linda, some part of me still cares about you, I said. I don't know if it's my male side, female side, or just my foolish side, but one thing I won't do is lie to our family. You wouldn't dare, she pleaded. Not Daddy, please. Watch me, I said, and hung up. My finger hovered over the speed dial for Linda's father, but I didn't press it. Walter had been struggling since his wife died of breast cancer 2 years ago. He was a good man, but in his 80s, his health was fragile, and his will to live seemed weak. I could understand that today. And he was a good man. I figured it was better to let him live in peace rather than ruin his life because of his daughter's actions. My anger began to subside, so I decided to tell Linda my decision. I picked up Larson's cell phone bill and dialed the number listed. A man answered. I hesitated for a moment. Linda Harris, please, I asked. There was a pause, and I could hear someone crying in the background, presumably Linda. Who's asking? Larson's voice came through. Her father, you piece of shit, I lied, unable to suppress my anger. And don't bother talking to her. Just tell my daughter to forget me. Leave my grandchildren, my son-in-law, and me alone. Goodbye, asshole. Less than a minute later, feeling a pang of remorse, I dialed Linda's cell number. She answered right away but was still crying. Hello, Linda, I said, breaking the silence. Did you have a good day? John, why? She asked. Why did you tell my father? It could destroy him. He's been in such poor health lately. You knew that. Hey, don't shift the blame, I said, forcing myself to utter the harsh words. It wasn't your father who was on the phone with your lover, it was me. I care about your father, and your cheating would have killed him. Let me make something clear. Are you listening? Yes, she said. I'm listening. Don't let this guy come between me and my daughters, or your father will find out everything about you. All the raw details, as you put it, I warned. Don't think I'm joking. I've trusted you for most of my adult life. I didn't think it was possible, but you shattered that trust. I'm struggling not to just end this right now. I'm filled with so much hatred for you, and that's what defines me at this moment. Do you get it? Yes, she said between sobs. Mark, I'm so sorry. I never wanted this. Neither did I replied, and hung up. 6 months later, I got the official divorce papers marking the end of my marriage. Although I had moved past my depression, there was still a sense of emptiness in my life. I couldn't quite pinpoint what was missing. I tried dating again, but didn't get very far. I guess the women I met could sense my emotional baggage. I had a one-night stand with a fellow work colleague who was also divorced. But even that left me feeling more alone. Sex felt meaningless without love and affection. We were just two adults seeking momentary relief, but it only deepened my sense of isolation. One evening, after coming home from work, an epiphany hit me. Since moving into my new apartment and selling the old house, I had been giving names to the dust clumps around the place. Hi, Jack, I said, peeking out the door. I was reliving my bachelor days, naming the dust bunnies I found everywhere, especially behind doors and under the bed. Jack stood by the front door, while Roger and Bugs resided under the bed. I almost reached for the vacuum cleaner, feeling embarrassed at the thought that Larson would never let his place get this messy. I almost grabbed the vacuum cleaner from the closet, feeling embarrassed that Larson would never leave his place in such a mess. The next day, I tore off a corner of a condom wrapper and left it lying on the floor by the bed. I shook up the blankets, jumped around a bit in the middle of the bed to dishevel the sheets, and then carefully placed the blanket back in almost the same position. I also left marks from 2 glasses on the coffee table, some ashes in the toilet, and kept the ceiling fan running. I picked up a porcelain trinket, smashed it, and tossed the pieces in the trash. I grabbed a rare bottle of wine from the shelf, chose the dustiest one, opened it, poured it out, and left the empty bottle in the trash. That was my grand finale. Later that evening, my phone rang. It was Sarah, my youngest. Daddy, you have to do something, she pleaded. Anything for you, honey, I responded. Help Mommy, she said, struggling to keep her voice steady. She's at the police station. This guy hit her, and she called the police. She has nowhere to go and doesn't want to go back there anymore. He's gotten really violent lately. Hang in there, honey, I interrupted. I'm not the guy to help your mother. I hate her deeply and, honestly, I'm kind of enjoying what's happening to her, not the beating, but the mess she's made with her new guy. What's going on, Daddy? Sarah begged. She's my mom and she needs help. Okay. It's only because you asked, I said. Don't expect me to do more than just pick her up and drive her somewhere. Thanks, Dad, she said. A few minutes later, I was at the police station. Linda was still being questioned, so I had to wait. I sent her a note letting her know I was waiting. An hour later, I felt a pang of guilt when I saw Linda, her left eye swollen and black. She cried as she approached me with open arms. I struggled, but managed to keep her at arm's length. Hey, I'm here because my daughter asked me to come, I said. Don't think for a second that we're going to be friends. I'll give you a ride wherever you need to go, but that's all. I walked out of the police station without looking back to see if she was following. Her sobs were the only indication she was near. Once we were in the car, I asked, "Where do you want to go?" "Home," she replied. Without a word, I drove to our destination. Linda only reacted when I turned onto Larson Street and parked in front of the house. "I don't want to go there," she said, her voice trembling with tears. "Look, Larson's in jail right now. You have plenty of time to gather your things and leave." She stared at me for a moment before getting out of the car and heading to the apartment. Soon, she began hauling out trash bags filled with her clothes. She hadn't taken much when she left me, so she was done quickly. Afterward, we left. A few minutes later, she asked, "Where are we going?" Her voice was filled with apprehension. "We're going to your father's house," I told her. "You said you wanted to go home. You don't have another home." We drove in silence for a while. Her father lived far out in the suburbs. Linda broke the silence. "I didn't get a chance to apologize to you," she said. "I'm sorry for what I did. I was foolish and you caught me cheating. I admit that, but I never stopped loving you. I just forgot what that meant for a while. I didn't even want to stay with Eric, we didn't have much in common. I'm sorry for hurting you." I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. Could I have said, "It's okay"? Absolutely not. Could I tell her I forgave her? That would have been a lie, as I still resented how she had ruined our marriage. My silence, I believe, hurt her more than any grand speech could have. As we neared her father's house, Linda looked at me and asked, "What am I going to tell my father?" I was at a loss for words. "What the hell? We've been divorced for months and you haven't told him?" "I just told him we were having trouble," Linda said. "You're definitely in trouble now," I replied. "Find a good reason, but don't make me the bad guy, or I'll tell him the whole truth." It was late, and I didn't offer to help Linda move her things into her father's house. For one, I was savoring her misery. For another, I didn't want to face Walter. The next day, I parked across the street from Larson's house. He got home just before noon. It was time to deliver the final blow to their affair. I grabbed the cheapest bottle of Chilean wine I had bought, a $10 investment, and headed up the stairs. Larson answered the door, surprised to see me. "Hi," I said. "We've never met, but I'm John Harris, Linda McKay's ex-husband." I handed him the bottle of wine. "Here, take this. I'm not a freeloader. This replaces the other bottle of wine I emptied." I pulled a key from my pocket and handed it to him. "Oh, and I won't be needing this either. Linda moved out last night." I smiled all the way to my car, feeling a spring in my step. Revenge can be so satisfying. I felt like I could finally move on after getting my revenge on that bitch.
Welcome back to Cheating Tales Lab. We're so glad you're here. We've got an incredible story lined up for you today, and we hope it keeps you on the edge of your seat. Let's jump right into the story. Preston Fowler's fingers drummed an impatient rhythm on the steering wheel as he navigated through the congested streets of downtown. At 45, the architect had built a reputation for innovative, sustainable designs, but today his mind was consumed by the eco-friendly skyscraper project that was eating up his time and sanity in equal measure. As he pulled into the driveway of his suburban home, the tension in his shoulders eased slightly. The front door swung open before he could reach for his keys. Jessica, his wife of 20 years, practically bounced out to greet him, her enthusiasm seeming oddly out of place. "Preston, darling, you're home early," she chirped, her eyes gleaming with an intensity that made him pause. He glanced at his watch. "It's past 8, Jess." "Oh, is it?" She laughed, the sound a touch too high. "I guess I lost track of time. How was your day?" Preston raised an eyebrow, curiosity momentarily overriding his exhaustion. "Same as always. Meetings, revisions, more meetings." "You seem chipper." Jessica's smile widened. "I have a surprise for you," she said, practically vibrating with excitement. "A surprise?" Preston echoed, his fatigue-addled brain struggling to keep up. "Meet me at the Regal Hotel tomorrow at 7 p.m. Don't be late." The enthusiasm in her voice felt off, like a discordant note in a familiar melody. But Preston, his mind still half occupied with work concerns, simply nodded. "All right," he said, stepping past her into the house. "I'll be there. Now, if you don't mind, I need a shower." As the hot water pounded against his back, Preston's thoughts drifted. Their marriage had been distant lately, true. The passion that once burned between them had cooled to embers. But he'd been working hard, building a future for them both. Surely Jessica understood that? He stepped out of the shower, wrapping a towel around his waist. Jessica was nowhere to be seen. Probably already asleep, he thought. Or pretending to be. He sighed, the weight of unspoken words hanging heavy in the air. The next evening, Preston arrived at the Regal Hotel precisely at 7 p.m., a bouquet of roses in hand. The concierge, a young man with a polite smile, directed him to a suite on the top floor. "Enjoy your evening, sir," the concierge said, a hint of knowing in his voice that made Preston's skin prickle. As the elevator ascended, a mix of anticipation and unease settled in his stomach. What was Jessica playing at? Was this her way of rekindling their romance? He knocked on the suite door, straightening his tie with his free hand. The door swung open to reveal Jessica, but she wasn't alone. A man Preston had never seen before stood behind her, a smug grin plastered across his face. "Hello, Preston," Jessica said, her voice devoid of warmth. "You're right on time. Always so dependable." Preston's eyes darted between Jessica and the stranger. "What's going on here, Jess?" Jessica's lips curled into a cruel smile. "Meet Antonio, my high school sweetheart." "Your surprise is this. I'm leaving you." Preston stood frozen, his mind refusing to process the words. Antonio sauntered forward, draping his arm around Jessica's waist. "Thanks for keeping her warm for me, chump," Antonio sneered, his eyes gleaming with malicious glee. Jessica's eyes, once warm and loving, now held only cold contempt. She tossed an envelope at Preston's feet. "Divorce papers. I've already transferred your retirement funds to my account." She paused, savoring the shock on Preston's face. "Oh, and here's a one-way ticket to Alaska. Why don't you go cool off?" The roses slipped from Preston's grasp, scattering across the plush hotel carpet. He stared at the fallen flowers, his mind reeling. "You can't be serious," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Antonio laughed, the sound grating on Preston's nerves. "Oh, she's dead serious, buddy. You snooze, you lose." Preston's shock began to give way to anger. He took a step forward, his fists clenching at his sides. "You think you can just throw away 20 years of marriage? For this high school fling?" Jessica's eyes narrowed. "Watch it, Preston. Don't make a scene. It's over. Accept it and move on." "Move on?" Preston's voice rose. "You've stolen my money, my future, and you expect me to just move on?" Antonio stepped between them, his chest puffed out. "You heard the lady. It's over. Now why don't you take that ticket and disappear? Before things get unpleasant. Preston's eyes locked with Jessica's. For a moment, he searched for any sign of the woman he'd loved for 2 decades. He found nothing but cold indifference. "You'll regret this," he said, his voice low and steady. "Both of you." He turned on his heel and walked out, leaving the roses scattered on the floor behind him. Days blurred together as Preston grappled with the betrayal. He found himself sitting in his lawyer's office, the tasteful decor a stark contrast to the chaos in his mind. Cameron Schneider, a sharp-eyed attorney with a reputation for ruthlessness in divorce cases, reviewed the situation. "Preston, I've got good news and bad news," Cameron said, leaning back in his leather chair. "The good news is, the transfer of your retirement funds was illegal. We can sue for fraud." Preston leaned forward, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "And the bad news?" Cameron's expression turned grim. "Jessica's filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. She's moving fast, trying to get ahead of us." Preston's jaw clenched, his eyes hardening. "She's the one with differences, like preferring her high school fling to her husband of 2 decades. "I understand you're angry, Preston," Cameron said, his tone measured. "But we need to approach this strategically. Emotion won't win this battle." Preston nodded, forcing himself to take a deep breath. "You're right. What's our next move?" Cameron pulled out a file, spreading documents across his desk. "We counterfile, citing adultery. It won't stop the divorce, but it could affect the division of assets." "Do it," Preston said without hesitation. Cameron nodded, then hesitated. "There's more. Jessica's visa is tied to your marriage. If we report the fraud, it'll be canceled." A glimmer of resolve sparked in Preston's eyes. He leaned forward, his voice low and determined. "Do it. And Cameron? I want everything we can legally throw at them." Cameron's lips curled into a predatory smile. "Consider it done. We'll hit them so hard they won't know what hit them." As Preston stood to leave, Cameron called out, "Preston, one more thing. Don't contact Jessica or that Antonio character. Let them think you're licking your wounds. The element of surprise will be our best weapon." Preston nodded, a smile spreading across his face. "Don't worry, Cameron. I've got no interest in talking to either of them, but they'll hear from me soon enough." Preston threw himself into his work, channeling his pain and anger into the skyscraper project. His colleagues noticed the change, the increased intensity in his eyes, the longer hours he put in, but no one dared to mention it. Late one evening, as he was leaving the office, a conversation between 2 junior architects caught his attention. "Did you hear about that international competition?" one of them asked, excitement evident in his voice. "Yeah, the Sustainable City Project, right?" the other replied. "The prize is huge." Preston slowed his pace, listening intently. "But there's a catch," the first one continued. "You need to work with a partner from a developing country." "Seriously? That's going to make things complicated." Preston paused, an idea forming. He turned back, startling the 2 younger men. "Tell me more about this competition," he said, his tone brooking no argument. 20 minutes later, Preston was back at his desk, furiously researching. Hours ticked by as he scoured the internet, looking for the perfect partner. As dawn broke, casting long shadows across his office, he stumbled upon a promising lead. A talented but unknown architect in Jessica's home country. A smile spread across Preston's face. 2 birds, 1 stone, he muttered, reaching for his phone to make travel arrangements. As he booked his flight, Preston's mind raced with possibilities. This wasn't just about winning a competition anymore. It was about rebuilding his life and exacting justice. Jessica and Antonio had tried to break him, but they'd only succeeded in unleashing a side of him they never knew existed. He pulled up Jessica's social media profiles, noting with disgust the lovey-dovey photos she'd already posted with Antonio. "Enjoy it while it lasts," he muttered, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. For a moment, he considered leaving a scathing comment. But no, that would tip his hand. Instead, he closed the browser and pulled up his email. He had work to do, plans to make. Jessica and Antonio thought they'd won, that they'd left him broken and defeated. They couldn't be more wrong. Preston Fowler, the mild-mannered architect, was gone. In his place stood a man determined to not just survive, but to thrive, and to make those who betrayed him pay dearly for their mistakes. As the first rays of sunlight crept through his office window, Preston allowed himself a moment of reflection. The pain of betrayal still burned, but it was fuel now, driving him forward. He trusted too easily, loved too blindly. Never again. He picked up the phone, dialing Cameron's number. It was early, but he knew his lawyer would be up. Cameron? It's Preston. I need you to do something for me. The stale air of the airplane cabin did little to clear Preston's head as he touched down in Jessica's home country. The 14-hour flight had given him ample time to stew in his anger, to plot his next moves. As he stepped off the plane, he straightened his tie and set his jaw. This wasn't just a business trip. This was war. Preston's contact, a local architect named Maureen, was waiting for him at the arrival's gate. She was younger than he expected, probably in her early 30s, with sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. "Mr. Fowler?" she asked, extending her hand. Her grip was firm, professional. Preston nodded, shaking her hand. "Call me Preston. Thank you for meeting me on such short notice, Maureen." They made their way to a nearby cafe, the bustle of the airport fading into background noise. As they sat down with their coffees, Maureen got straight to the point. "Your email was intriguing," she said, her eyes studying Preston's face. "But I have to ask, why me? You're already successful. You could partner with anyone for this competition." Preston took a sip of his coffee, buying himself a moment to choose his words carefully. He'd prepared for this question, knew he needed to strike the right balance between honesty and strategy. "Your designs are revolutionary," he said, meeting her gaze. "I've been following your work for a while now. The way you integrate local materials and traditional techniques into modern, sustainable structures. It's exactly what this competition is looking for." Maureen's eyebrow arched skeptically. "Flattery will get you nowhere, Mr. Fowler. What's the real reason?" Preston's lips twitched in a hint of a smile. He appreciated her directness. "All right, cards on the table. I'm going through a personal upheaval. My wife left me, tried to clean out my accounts. I need this win, both professionally and personally. And I believe that together, we could not only win this competition but change the face of sustainable architecture." He watched as Maureen processed this information, her expression unreadable. Finally, she spoke. "And what do I get out of this, besides a chance at a prize that's not guaranteed?" "Exposure," Preston said without hesitation. "Win or lose, you'll be working with one of the top firms in sustainable design. It's a foot in the door of an industry that, let's face it, isn't always welcoming to women, especially in this part of the world." Maureen's eyes narrowed, but Preston could see the spark of interest there. "You've done your homework," she said. Preston nodded. "I believe in being prepared. So, what do you say? Partners?" Maureen was silent for a long moment, her fingers tapping a rhythmless beat on the table. Finally, she extended her hand. "Partners," she said. "But I warn you, Mr. Fowler, I don't tolerate being used or manipulated. If I sense any funny business, I'm out. Understood?" Preston shook her hand, a genuine smile crossing his face for the first time in weeks. "Understood. And please, it's Preston. We're partners now, after all." As they left the cafe, diving into the humid air of the city, Preston felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The first piece of his plan was in place. Jessica and Antonio might think they'd broken him, but they had no idea what was coming. Across the ocean, Jessica and Antonio were living it up, oblivious to the storm brewing. They moved into a penthouse apartment, paid for with Preston's stolen retirement funds. Jessica lounged by the rooftop pool, sipping champagne as Antonio massaged her shoulders. "You know," Antonio said, his hands working out a knot in Jessica's neck, "I could get used to this life." Jessica laughed, the sound echoing across the empty rooftop. "Well, get used to it, baby. We've got plenty to spare." Antonio's hands paused. "About that, how long do you think it'll take before the money transfer gets noticed?" Jessica waved her hand dismissively. "Please. Preston's probably crying into his blueprints right now. By the time he figures it out, if he ever does, we'll be long gone." She turned, pulling Antonio in for a kiss. Now stop worrying and pour me another glass. We've got a lot of lost time to make up for." As they clinked their glasses together, neither of them noticed the dark clouds gathering on the horizon. The storm was coming, whether they were ready or not. Preston hunched over the drafting table, his pen flying across the paper. Across from him, Maureen was deep in concentration, her computer screen flickering with complex 3D models. They'd been working nonstop for weeks, their design for a self-sustaining city taking shape before their eyes. "What if we integrated vertical farming here?" Maureen suggested, pointing to a section of the model. "It would increase food production and add a unique aesthetic element." Preston nodded, quickly sketching the idea. "Brilliant. And if we use native plants, it'll tie into the local ecosystem." Their partnership had flourished beyond Preston's wildest expectations. Maureen's innovative ideas perfectly complemented his technical expertise. As their design gained traction in the competition, Preston felt a surge of satisfaction. This was more than just a professional triumph. It was the first step in his plan for revenge. But even as he threw himself into the project, Preston hadn't forgotten about Jessica. In his spare moments, he'd been discreetly gathering information about her past and her home country. Every scrap of intel was carefully filed away, ammunition for the battle to come. His phone buzzed, Cameron's name flashing on the screen. Preston excused himself, stepping out onto the balcony of their rented workspace. "Cameron, what's the news?" His lawyer's voice crackled over the line. "The fraud case is solid, Preston. We've got her dead to rights on the retirement fund transfer. But there's more. We're pushing for an annulment based on Jessica's infidelity." Preston's grip tightened on the phone. "Excellent. What's the catch?" "I hear a but coming." Cameron sighed. "But there's a complication. She's trying to claim half your business assets. Says she supported you while you built the company, so she's entitled to a share." Preston's eyes narrowed, his free hand clenching into a fist. "Not for long, she's not." "What are you planning, Preston?" Cameron asked, a note of concern in his voice. "Don't worry about it," Preston said. "Just keep the legal pressure on. I'll handle the rest." He ended the call, his mind already racing. Jessica thought she could take half his company? She had another thing coming. Over the next few days, Preston initiated a series of careful maneuvers. He restructured his company, moving assets into protected trusts and offshore accounts. It was all perfectly legal, if a bit ethically gray. But Preston was past caring about ethics. This was about survival. As he worked, he kept one eye on the competition. Their design was gaining attention, industry insiders whispering about the dark horse team that was shaking things up. Preston allowed himself a smile. Let Jessica and Antonio think they'd won. The game was just beginning. Jessica frowned at the bank statement, her manicured nail tapping against the screen of her tablet. "Antonio," she called, her voice sharp. "Come look at this." Antonio sauntered in from the bedroom, still buttoning up his silk shirt. "What is it, babe?" "The money," Jessica said, thrusting the tablet at him. It's not all there." Antonio's brow furrowed as he looked at the numbers. "What do you mean? Did you spend more than you thought?" Jessica shot him a glare. "Don't be stupid. I know exactly how much I've spent. This is something else." She paced the room, her mind racing. "It's Preston. It has to be. That sneaky bastard is up to something." Antonio flopped onto the couch, looking unconcerned. "So what? We still have plenty. And by the time he figures out how to get it back, we'll be long gone." Jessica whirled on him, her eyes flashing. "You don't get it, do you? This isn't just about the money. It's about winning. And I refuse to let that pathetic excuse for a man beat me." She grabbed her phone, furiously tapping out a message. "We need to hit back. Hard." "What are you thinking?" Antonio asked, a hint of nervousness creeping into his voice. Jessica's lips curved into a cruel smile. Preston's always been so proud of his precious skyscraper project. What if something were to go wrong? Over the next few days, Jessica and Antonio launched their counterattack. They spread rumors about structural instabilities in Preston's eco-friendly skyscraper, whispering to investors and city officials about potential safety hazards. But Preston was one step ahead. He'd anticipated their move, had been preparing for it since the moment Jessica betrayed him. Every stage of the project had been meticulously documented, every safety measure triple-checked and verified by independent experts. When the rumors reached fever pitch, Preston calmly presented his evidence. Blueprints, safety reports, material analyses, all laid out in a press conference that left no room for doubt. The attempted sabotage backfired spectacularly, damaging Jessica and Antonio's credibility instead. As Preston wrapped up the press conference, fielding questions from reporters with ease, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Maureen. Saw the news. Nicely done. But we've got work to do. Competition deadlines coming up. Preston allowed himself a small smile as he texted back. On my way. Let's show them what real innovation looks like. Across town, Jessica threw her phone against the wall, watching with satisfaction as it shattered. That bastard, she seethed. How does he always stay one step ahead? Antonio, lounging on the couch, barely looked up from his magazine. Maybe it's time to cut our losses, babe. We've still got enough. Enough? Jessica interrupted, her voice rising to a shriek. It's not about enough. It's about winning. And I refuse to let Preston win. She stormed over to the liquor cabinet, pouring herself a generous glass of scotch. As she drank, her mind raced. The money was dwindling faster than she'd anticipated. Preston was outmaneuvering her at every turn. She needed to act fast. We need to speed up the divorce proceedings, she said, more to herself than to Antonio. Secure what assets we can before Preston can protect them all. Antonio finally looked up, a hint of concern in his eyes. Jess, maybe we should. Shut up, Jessica snapped. I'm not asking for your opinion. Just do as I say. Got it? As Antonio nodded meekly, Jessica turned to stare out the window at the city skyline. Somewhere out there, Preston was plotting his next move. But she'd be damned if she'd let him win. This war was far from over. The auditorium buzzed with anticipation. Architects, investors, and media from around the world had gathered for the final presentations of the International Sustainable City Design Competition. Preston stood backstage, his heart pounding. Months of work, sleepless nights, and relentless planning had led to this moment. Maureen approached, her face a mask of calm determination. Ready? Preston nodded, straightening his tie. Born ready. As they waited for their turn, Preston's eyes scanned the audience. His breath caught in his throat as he spotted two familiar faces. Jessica and Antonio sat near the back, whispering to each other and smirking. They'd come to gloat, no doubt expecting him to fail. Looks like we have some unexpected guests, Maureen muttered, following Preston's gaze. Preston's jaw clenched. Good. Let them watch. Next up, presenting their design for a self-sustaining urban ecosystem, Preston Fowler and Maureen Kigali. The announcer's voice boomed. As they took the stage, Preston locked eyes with Jessica for a brief moment. Her smug smile only fueled his determination. He turned to the judges, his voice steady and confident as he began their presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, what you're about to see isn't just a city. It's a living, breathing ecosystem that will revolutionize urban living. For the next 30 minutes, Preston and Maureen laid out their vision. They detailed the vertical farms integrated into residential towers, the revolutionary waste management system that turned garbage into energy, and the network of green spaces that served both recreational and environmental purposes. As Maureen explained the cultural aspects of their design, Preston glanced at Jessica and Antonio. Their smiles had faded, replaced by looks of growing unease. The judges peppered them with questions, which Preston and Maureen fielded with ease. Their preparation paid off as they addressed every concern and elaborated on the finer points of their design. As they concluded, the audience erupted into applause. Preston allowed himself a small smile. They'd nailed it. Hours later, after all the presentations were complete, the judges returned to announce the winner. After careful deliberation, the head judge began. We are pleased to announce that the winner of this year's International Sustainable City Design Competition is Preston Fowler and Maureen Kigali. The auditorium exploded with cheers. Preston and Maureen embraced, both of them grinning from ear to ear. As they made their way to the stage to accept their award, Preston caught sight of Jessica and Antonio slinking towards the exit, their faces twisted with anger and disappointment. The next hour was a whirlwind of congratulations, interviews, and handshakes. Preston's phone buzzed constantly with messages from colleagues and potential clients. This win wasn't just a personal triumph, it was a game-changer for his career. As the crowd began to thin, Preston spotted Jessica making her way towards him. Her face was a mask of false cheer, but he could see the calculation in her eyes. "Preston, darling," she called, her voice sickly sweet. "Congratulations on your win. I always knew you had it in you." Preston turned to face her, his expression cold. "Save it, Jessica. We both know you came here hoping to see me fail." Jessica's smile faltered. "Now, that's not fair." "You what?" Preston interrupted. "Thought you'd swoop in and take credit? Try to weasel your way back into my life now that I'm successful again." He leaned in close, his voice low. "Let me make this clear. You're nothing to me now. Nothing but a mistake I'm in the process of erasing." Jessica's face contorted with rage. "You bastard. You think you've won? This isn't over." Preston smiled, a cold, ruthless expression that made Jessica take a step back. "Oh, it's far from over. But trust me, you won't like how it ends." He turned his back on her, rejoining Maureen and a group of investors who were eagerly discussing future projects. As he engaged in the conversation, Preston could feel Jessica's glare boring into his back. But for the first time since her betrayal, he felt nothing but satisfaction. The tables had turned, and Jessica was about to learn just how badly she'd miscalculated. The courthouse loomed before Preston, a monument to justice that would soon become the stage for his final act of retribution. He straightened his tie, his face a mask of calm determination as he climbed the steps. Inside, he found Cameron waiting, a thick briefcase in hand. "Ready for this?" the lawyer asked, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. Preston nodded. "More than ready. Let's finish this." They entered the courtroom, the wooden doors creaking ominously behind them. Jessica and Antonio were already there, huddled with their lawyer. Jessica shot Preston a venomous glare as he took his seat, but he ignored her, focusing instead on the task at hand. The judge entered, and the court fell silent. "We're here today in the matter of Fowler versus Fowler," she announced, her voice echoing in the hushed room. "Mr. Schneider, you may present your case." Cameron stood, his presence commanding the room. "Your Honor, what we have here is not just a simple divorce case. This is a story of betrayal, fraud, and malicious intent." Over the next hour, Cameron laid out their case with surgical precision. He presented evidence of Jessica's infidelity, complete with time-stamped photos and hotel receipts. He detailed the illegal transfer of Preston's retirement funds, showing bank statements and tracing the money trail. "But Your Honor," Cameron continued, his voice rising with controlled indignation, "the defendant's actions go beyond mere infidelity and theft. They actively attempted to sabotage my client's professional reputation." He presented affidavits from investors and city officials, revealing Jessica and Antonio's attempts to spread false rumors about Preston's skyscraper project. Email trails and recorded phone calls painted a damning picture of their malicious campaign. As Cameron spoke, Preston watched Jessica's face. Her confident smirk had long since faded, replaced by a look of growing panic. Antonio, for his part, looked like he wanted to sink into the floor. "Furthermore, Your Honor," Cameron said, producing a final set of documents, "we have evidence of the defendant's past indiscretions in her home country. Actions that, if brought to light, could have serious consequences for her immigration status." Jessica's head snapped up, her eyes wide with shock. She hadn't expected this, hadn't realized how thoroughly Preston had investigated her past. The judge's face grew increasingly stern as she reviewed the evidence. When Cameron finally concluded, she turned to Jessica's lawyer. "Counselor, do you have anything to add in your client's defense?" Jessica's lawyer, a nervous-looking man who seemed out of his depth, stuttered through a weak rebuttal. His argument sounded hollow in the face of the mountain of evidence Cameron had presented. After a brief recess, the judge returned to deliver her verdict. The courtroom held its breath. In light of the overwhelming evidence presented, the judge began, her voice filled with disgust. "I rule entirely in favor of the plaintiff, Preston Fowler. The marriage is hereby annulled on grounds of fraud and infidelity. All of Mrs. Fowler's claims to Mr. Fowler's assets are dismissed. Preston allowed himself a small smile as the judge continued. Furthermore, Mrs. Fowler is ordered to repay the stolen retirement funds with interest. And given the evidence of her past indiscretions and current illegal activities, I am recommending a full investigation into her immigration status. Jessica's face drained of color. She turned to Antonio, but he was already inching away from her, his eyes darting towards the exit. As the judge's gavel fell, Preston stood, buttoning his jacket. He looked at Jessica, seeing not the woman he had loved for 20 years, but a stranger who had tried to destroy him. "I told you this wasn't over," he said quietly as he passed her. "Enjoy your trip home." Outside the courthouse, reporters clamored for a statement. Preston paused on the steps, Cameron at his side. "Mr. Fowler, how do you feel about the verdict?" Preston straightened his tie, his face a mask of professional calm. "Justice has been served," he said simply. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a city to build." As he walked away, leaving the chaos behind him, Preston felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The betrayal that had nearly broken him was now nothing more than a closed chapter in his life. Ahead lay new challenges, new triumphs. And this time, he'd face them on his own terms. Months passed like pages turning in a book, each one filled with victories both personal and professional. Preston stood atop his completed skyscraper, the wind whipping at his suit as he surveyed the city sprawling below. The eco-friendly building was a testament to his vision, a gleaming beacon of sustainable architecture that had already become a landmark. The door to the roof opened, and Maureen stepped out to join him. In the months since their competition win, she had become more than just a partner. She was a friend, a confidant, and a driving force in their newly formed international firm. "Quite a view," Maureen said, coming to stand beside him. "Hard to believe how far we've come in such a short time." Preston nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. "It's been quite a journey." Maureen leaned against the railing, her eyes sparkling with barely contained excitement. "I've got some news," she said. "I heard through the grapevine about Jessica and Antonio." Preston raised an eyebrow, curious despite himself. "Oh, they were last seen arguing at the airport," Maureen said, a hint of satisfaction in her voice. "Apparently, he dumped her when the money ran out. Left her high and dry at the departure gate." Preston absorbed this information, surprised to find that he felt nothing. No satisfaction, no anger, not even pity. Just nothing. "Karma," he said simply. Maureen studied his face for a moment, then nodded, seemingly satisfied with what she saw. "So," she said, changing the subject, "shall we discuss our next project? I've got some ideas for that renewal contract in Singapore." As they delved into the details of their upcoming work, Preston found his mind wandering. He thought about the man he had been just a year ago. Trusting, naive, blindsided by betrayal. That man was gone, replaced by someone stronger, more cautious, but also more fulfilled. The betrayal had nearly broken him, it was true. But from those broken pieces, he had built something far greater than he had ever imagined. A thriving international firm, a reputation as a pioneer in sustainable architecture, and genuine connections with people who valued him for his skills and his character, not what they could take from him. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Preston allowed himself a moment of reflection. He had not just survived, he had thrived. The city below, with its bustling streets and soaring buildings, seemed to pulse with possibility. And he was ready to shape it, one innovative design at a time. "You know," he said to Maureen, interrupting her mid-sentence about solar panel efficiency, "I think we're going to need a bigger office." Maureen laughed, the sound carried away by the wind. "Dreaming big again, are we?" Preston smiled, a genuine, warm expression that reached his eyes. "Always," he said. "After all, why stop now?" As they turned to head back inside, Preston cast one last look at the city skyline. The past was behind him, a closed book. Ahead lay endless possibilities, a future limited only by his imagination and will. And for the first time in a long time, Preston Fowler was excited to see what tomorrow would bring.
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comment section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy the story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.
Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
The pain radiated from every part of my body as I lay there, the steady beep of a machine piercing the fog that surrounded my thoughts. Slowly, it dawned on me. I was in a hospital. Judging by the level of pain, something terrible had happened. Disoriented, I tried to piece together the last thing I could remember, but my mind was a blank canvas. It felt like trying to grasp smoke. I had no idea what had happened to put me in this bed, but I figured I'd start with the basics. What year was it? 1969. Who was president? Nixon. What was my name? John Stapleton. How old was I? 49. Those details came to me easily, but the rest? Nothing. My body screamed at me with every shallow breath, but the emptiness in my mind was even more unnerving. What had happened to me? Why was I here? And why couldn't I remember? Okay, I have some basic parameters in place which meant my mind was still working. Now let's try some recall. What memories could I pull up? As I lay there, I saw mental flashes of my brother Jack and me during the Depression gathering coal that had fallen from the trains so that we could have heat during the winter. I remember my paper route and the fact that my family was so poor during the Depression that all the money my brother and I made we turned over to our mother, just so we could put food on the table. My mind continued to flash pictures, and I recalled that we were having dinner when we found out Pearl Harbor had been bombed. I also recalled enlisting in the Army on January 2nd, 1942. I was 22. Memories started cascading from my mind at that point. Basic training in Louisiana, shipping over to England, more training, and then June 6th, 1944. I was a sergeant by then in charge of a squad. The beach was my first real taste of combat, and I wished with all my might that it would have been my last. Most of us made it through that day, but in the following months, I lost all of my original squad except Jack Murphy, a farmer with a wife and 2 kids from Pennsylvania. Jack was my best friend and more like a brother to me than even my own flesh and blood. We fought through the hedgerows in Normandy, at the St. Lo breakout, and all across France. With each guy we lost Jack, and I drew closer together. We thought that we might just get through the war safe and sound, but then came the Huertigan Forest. During the winter of 44, we came up against a well-entrenched and still dangerous enemy. The woods were treacherous, and the body count began to rise as we pushed our way through. We had felt before the Huertigan that the war was nearly won, but the Germans soon debased us of that notion. Our battle was eclipsed by events in the Bulge where Hitler had managed a powerful counterattack, but the Huertigan was every bit as desperate and deadly. In the 90 days that the battle lasted, the U.S. Army had about 24,000 combat casualties, with another 9,000 men suffering trench foot or exhaustion, so that had to be pulled from the line. My war changed just before Christmas of 1944. My squad was sent to recon an area in front of our lines to determine enemy positions and firepower. It was felt at G2 that the Germans might have been pulling back, and they needed to know. My 7 men, including me, set out to scout the line in the early hours of December 20th. We had gone nearly a quarter of a mile and were spread out when the early morning was shattered by a loud bang as an MG-42 spit out 1,200 rounds per minute. My men hit the ground, but I noticed that Murphy had fairly been cut in two by the Kraut machine gun. I called out as loudly as I could, "Keep down and give me suppressing fire." With the rest of the squad pumping lead in the direction of the gun, I moved out to the right, hoping to outflank it. The problem with outflanking is that you never know how many men the enemy has on their flanks, or where they might have another heavy weapons emplacement for covering fire. This morning, I got lucky. I soon found they had only one flanker, and he was an old man, a leftover from the First World War, judging by the medals he was wearing. He never knew what hit him as I squeezed off a round from my Garand and dropped him. I moved up on the gun, which was still spraying lead at my men, and lobbed a grenade into the pit. The sound was loud in the crisp winter air, and I moved up to ensure that the crew was dead. As I watched, one soldier stirred and moved with a look of fear creeping over his face when I jumped into the pit. I was not in my right mind, as I now only wanted a little payback for my best friend's life. The Kraut was wounded, but not too badly, and called out gently, "Hilf." He must have seen something horrible in my face as he began to squirm in an effort to escape from me. I just looked at him and thought, this bastard killed my friend? His eyes grew wide with fear as I pointed my Garand at his face, and in a pleading voice he kept saying, "Neen, Neen." Finally, he must have realized the futility of what he was saying as his face took on a calmer look, even though the fear was still evident, and in a quiet, calm voice simply said, "Warham?" It was the last thing he ever said as I pulled the trigger, sending a 30.06 round through his skull. When I shot, I seemed to come to my senses again, as I realized the kid I shot couldn't have been no more than 16. I rifled through his pockets and found his sold butch, which contained all his personal information. Much to my dismay, the kid had been in the army only 10 days. In late 44, the Germans were hoping that all the training the Hitler Youth gave them would suffice to stop the enemy. When one of my men, Kaminsky, came up to the gun trench, I remembered he spoke some German. Without looking at him, I asked, "Ski, what does Warum mean in German?" His answer would haunt me for the rest of my life when he flatly replied, "It means why." The war ended for me a month later when I got shrapnel in my leg, which took me out of combat. I left the battlefield, but the battlefield never left me. I came home in 45 with some souvenirs of the war and a permanent limp. My family had arranged a welcome home party for me, and that's where I met Becky, my future wife. Becky had worked with my brother at Curtiss-Wright Aircraft during the war, and they had become friends. They had dated, but they seemed to lack the spark that transforms friends into lovers. It was definitely not that way for us, as I hit it off with her immediately. Becky was what I needed: young, beautiful, and full of life. When I looked into her sparkling green eyes, I felt that all my sins had been forgiven. I wanted her to be with me till I died, and I asked her to marry me 1 month to the day after I met her. To my great joy and surprise, she agreed. Time moved quickly, and I was discharged from the army, newly married and moving up in the world. I got a job expediting orders at Bethlehem Steel and became a productive member of society. The only problem I had was the dreams I could not shake. That kid in the forest and the word Warum plagued me. I felt guilty over the fact that I had murdered a boy, but I never spoke of it and kept it bottled up inside of me. In 1947, we had our first and only child, a boy we named Jack after my friend, Jack Murphy, who died in the Huertigan forest. Over the years, the one thing that my both wife and son learned was to not ask me about the war. I wouldn't talk about it because I couldn't. I never let them know what hell was like and hoped they would never find out themselves. Jack grew up to be a strapping young man who wanted to get into the military in the worst way. I told him not to join the army as Vietnam was going strong by 1966. However, just like me, he didn't listen and became a chopper pilot. He died in combat during the Tet Offensive in 1968. With our son's death, my marriage seemed to decay. Becky withdrew from me, and I could not get her to let me back into her life. Somehow I think she blamed me for Jack's death, as I had never tried to stop our son from enlisting. Her contention was that by me not telling our boy about the war, I had inspired him to enlist to find out for himself. She would continually snap at me, and civil words between us became a rare thing indeed. I knew that she was grieving for her lost son, but so was I. Blaming me for his death was lubricious, but there was no stopping it. We both needed each other, but instead we were both intent in driving the other away. Nearly a year went by, and still we were antagonistic to each other. The only normalcy in my world by then was my job, and then it went away. In the summer of 1969, my department was eliminated by Beth Steel. I was given a severance pay for my 24 years of loyal service and simply let go. That day, I came home early for the first time since we had been married. When I walked into the house, I expected Becky to be shocked, but instead it was me who was shocked as I heard the sound of passion emanating from our bedroom. As I walked down the hall, I felt a white-hot anger building in me that I had not felt since Murphy's death in 44. When I looked in the bedroom, my eyes were assaulted by the vision of my naked wife in bed with the next-door neighbor's son who was home from college. She was calling out God's name, but somehow I didn't think she was praying. Without thinking, I turned from the deceitful scene I was witnessing and went to the garage. Finding the trunk I had bought after the war to store my army mementos in, I brought it down from its perch and put it on the floor. Even though I had not looked in the trunk since 46, I still kept the key on my key ring and with quivering hands unlocked it. Pulling up my old uniform, I found it wrapped in a German flag, a P-38 pistol. Along with the gun, I found its clip and even the original 8 rounds that had been in the weapon when I took it from a German officer I had shot. Loading the rounds in the clip, I slipped it into the grip and pulled the slide back. Walking back through the house, the sounds had gotten louder, if anything, and by the time I was stepping inside of my bedroom, I was greeted by the sight of my wife and her lover. They were both oblivious to me until I hit the lever that allowed the slide on the P-38 to slam home with a resounding click. The noise from the gun echoed loudly in the bedroom, and they both stopped and looked over at me. The boy fell out of my wife as he rolled over onto his back with a frightened look on his face. Becky was also shocked, but I think it was at the expression on my face as I moved quickly around the bed and brought the pistol up to the boy's face. Becky was screaming, "Stop!" but it was too late. I felt my finger tightening on the trigger, and with a rage inside of me, I was going to end this whole charade. It was then that I looked into his eyes, and they were the same as that German kid I shot in 44. In that minute, I knew I would not kill again, and with a slow final gesture, I brought the gun down and away from his face. The room was absolutely silent as I said in a sad voice, looking over to my wife, "Warren?" Not expecting any answer, I turned and let the gun drop to the floor as I left the house. As I was leaving, the boy broke into tears and Becky was calling my name, but I just didn't care anymore. I walked out and got into my car, and without a backward glance left my life behind. Somehow in my days, I returned to the one place where years ago I felt hope for my future. It was a bar in the northern section of town with the grand name of the Excelsior. When I had gotten off the train returning home in 45, a group of us, discharged soldiers, stopped in to have a beer. I remember how life seemed to be limitless for us because the war was over. We all had hopes and dreams then. Now mine were pretty much shattered. In 1969, the train station was long gone, but the bar still remained. The neighborhood had become disreputable and downtrodden, but almost on autopilot I went into the bar. The decor and clientele had changed greatly since the 40s, but the solid wooden bar was still the same. Feeling like I had found an old friend, I sat and ordered a beer. The beer became 2, and then 3 as I sat and tried to figure out where my life had gone. I had lost everything: my friend, my son, my job, and now my wife. By the time the bar was closing, I was feeling no pain, but I was not in a good mental place. As I staggered from the bar, I noticed a movement in the shadows as someone approached me. As I looked up, it was a young man holding a gun on me. His voice was nervous and clipped when he said, "Give me your money, old man. Now." I looked from the gun to his face and replied, "No." Somewhere in my drunken mind, I had determined that I had had enough. First it was the army telling me what to do, then my employer, then my wife, and now this punk. No, now it was time to make my own destiny, and since I no longer really cared what that was, it was easy for me to refuse him. The fact is, you are only scared if you have something to lose, and since I had already lost it all, I had no fear. The punk was confused but obstinate. "Give me your money now, old man, or die." I only smiled at him, which seemed to disconcert him even more. "Go ahead, kid. Pull the trigger." The panic was evident in his voice as he ordered me again. "You think I'm messing with you a hole? Give me the money." I shook my head no and replied in a flat monotone, "Screw you." The explosion was loud and bright, and the pain inside of my body felt like my organs had spontaneously combusted into flame. Mercifully, the pain was brief as it was quickly replaced by darkness as I felt myself sagging down onto the street with the life draining from my body. And that brought me back to the hospital room and its beeping monitor and searing pain. Apparently, I had not died, and in fact, from the amount of pain I was enduring, I was very much alive. I wanted to open my eyes, but seemed unable to accomplish the task. I was feeling myself starting to slip into that dark pit again when I felt a soft caress to my face and a voice that was familiar to me whispering in my ear, "Please come back to me, John. I'm so sorry. I was messed up in my mind, darling." I was lonely and flattered by his attention and let myself be coerced, but I never meant it to turn out this way. "I love you, my husband, and always will. We have lost so much, John. Don't let us lose each other. Come back to me, my love, and give me a second chance. I know now just how much you mean to me." At this point, I felt warm water on my cheek and the sounds of Becky's sobbing echoing in my mind. I tried hard to pull myself up from that dark pit wanting to take me down, and with a great effort managed to open my eyes to find Becky's face very close to mine. At first, she seemed unable to comprehend that I was looking at her, but then she jumped up and started screaming for the doctor. Within a few hours and close observation by the nurses, I seemed to stabilize, and the chances of relapsing back into a coma were remote. Finally, when all the action died down, we were alone, and Becky came over and hugged my face to hers, apologizing again for her actions and blaming me for our son's death. I was still mad at her, but I also still loved her and didn't want to lose her. We really talked for the first time since our son's death and discovered things about each other we didn't know. I finally opened up about the war and the things that I did and the demons that still plagued me. Becky told me about her grief and how lost she felt, and finally how she needed someone to blame for his death and wrongly lashed out at me. She also told me about the boy she had made love to, how he had been at home for the summer and came on to her when her self-esteem was at its lowest. He had seduced her, and knowingly she had allowed herself to be taken. She really seemed conflicted by what had happened, and it scared her. I was still mad at her for allowing herself to fall under his spell, but I had already begun the process of forgiving her. We shared a long marriage and the death of a son. We needed each other for support and had both forgotten that. By the time she had to go home, we both realized that we still belonged together, and that was where we had to start rebuilding from. When I got home from the hospital, she had redone our bedroom so that it was nothing like when I had found them together. We healed and moved on, and life did get better. I managed to get a job again working for an insurance agency in the spring of 1970, and we developed a new appreciation for each other. Forgiving and forgetting came hard, but we both achieved it, and our love held us together. Nobody knows how much time we have on this earth, and nobody should spend that time in the useless pursuit of anger and revenge. My wife and I moved on and had a pretty good life together after that. Did we fight? Definitely. Did we have relapses? Yes. Sometimes when you least expected it, the memories all came back and the anger with it. However, just like a fire, it had to be put out and forgotten. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.